Hey guys, welcome to part 6 of What If Naruto Was Trained by Anko. If you enjoy the video then like, share and subscribe, and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more such videos, and also check out my other playlist, hope you would like them too. So let's get started. Chapter 16, The Skin Test, Survival. Seated on top of an enclosed booth, the massive fenced-in forest that the Hokage required that he use minus behind him, and the various ninja in front of him, Hatek Kakashi causally flicked the page of his Ika. This was not to say that he wasn't watching those ninja present to this exam, being Unbu commander allowed him to divide his attention equally after all. Of all the groups, only 2 ninja appeared undaunted by the ominous atmosphere that extended from the tainted forest. One of course was the red-haired child called Gaara, who had been driven to near complete insanity due to his demon, and the other naturally was Uzumaki Naruto, who had spent more time with Mitriashi Anko than anybody ever should. Ahem. The polite voice of his assistant proctor said from the enclosed booth, gaining his attention. Kakashi-sama, isn't it about time to explain things to them? Right, Kakashi said, closing happily as he looked up to address the gathered ninja. Welcome to the second stage of the exam, practice area 44. Also known as the Forest of Death. There was a ripple through the group, but still Naruto and Gaara showed a frightening lack of intimidation. Opening his eye once more, Kakashi beamed at the gathered ninja, continuing his explanation. Before I explain everything, your villages has accepted that with the use of this stage there will be deaths. If any of you want to quit, now is your only chance, otherwise you either pass or die. Oi, just hurry up and tell us what we has to do. Naruto's voice, almost bileverent, rang out. Well, if you speak for everyone, okay then. Kakashi said, sweeping the group to see if anyone wanted to quit. Finding none, his visible eye went emotionless as he began to explain the rules. This exam is the ultimate survival test and it will be within this area. The rules are very simple. Each 3-man team will be given 3 scrolls. These scrolls bear the name of a ninja participating in this exam, and each team's set of scrolls will be matched so that 2 belong to that 2 and that the 3rd will belong to someone else. Are you just trying to complicate this? A loud voice interrupted, and Kakashi didn't even bother glancing at them, though a sudden whimpering sound could be heard from the white dog on their head. Each team will then have to locate the 3rd scroll that belongs to their team and head to the tower in the center of the Forest of Death. This ensures that each team will have to fight each other. To pass this test, there are 3 requirements. 1. Each team must has a scroll that bears that member's name. 2. Each team must be whole. 3. Only 4 teams with the best time will be allowed to advance further. Is there anything that would disqualify us? An older boy, from Kusa it appeared, asked. Disqualify? Kakashi asked as if the concept was amusing. Well, besides dying. The only other thing I can see is destroying a scroll. So, other than destroying a scroll and dying, the boy repeated as if to be clear, anything goes in there. Yes, once you're in the forest and until you reach the tower it's all about survival. So feel free to maim, torture, and do whatever else you feel is needed to ensure your advancement. Kakashi said blandly before holding a finger up, but please keep in mind that everyone else is going to be doing the same and will most likely respond in kind to your actions. Hurry up, Gaara commanded blankly, his flat green eyes boring into a nearby Kusa ninja. Sure, if you think you're up to this, Kakashi shot back, curving up happily. Okay, so 1 team at a time, come to the booth, get your scrolls and you'll be escorted to one of the gates. Gate 14. You find out which one has the scroll we need, INO. Naruto asked absently as he juggled the 3 scrolls they had been assigned. Yeah, the girl said quietly, fingering the ninja too she was wearing. Shino already has a bug on the team. We'll be ready to go once they tell us to start. Great, Naruto said, tossing her the scroll that bore her name, and then Shino the one that bore his. So which team was it? One of the Kusa teams. INO said obstinately, glancing at him. What are you going to do with that one? Oh, this. Naruto said, holding the scroll up absently. Well, I think I'll probably give it to the first person I see and let them deal with whoever the Gaara guy is. Forest of Death, Day 2, location 30 miles from the entrance gates. INO had known from the first glance that the forest was not to be taken lightly. The trees were larger and more twisted than anything she had ever seen before. The rusted fence with all of those warning signs and the barbed wire had proclaimed the danger clearly. It might even have been her imagination, but she could swear there had been monstrous shapes moving in the gloom of the trees. She had, however, apparently been the only one to notice those things. None of the other examinees had even looked away from Kakashi as he explained the concept of this exam. Well, except for Naruto, who had been busy mumbling to himself. Even after they had entered the gates, each member of their team sporting a scroll, he had seemed oblivious to the danger. Still, they were making good time with only 5 days to reach the center with their scrolls. Shino estimated that they were close. Using a stick to poke at the fire in front of her, INO turned her mind away from the forest and instead, focused on the more intriguing situation of Naruto's secret. Ever since he had admitted to giving misinformation to confirm that they had no spy, INO had become almost obsessed with trying to figure out what his real secret was. So far, despite rather creative guesses, she still hadn't gotten it right, which frustrated her to no end. Snap. Jerking at the sound of a snapping twig, INO whirled, hand clutching at her ninja too tightly and half drawing it, only to pause upon seeing Naruto returning from his latest nighttime patrol. At least, it looked like Naruto, as Shino had pointed out, it could be a real possibility for a spy to enter the team and attempt to steal their scrolls. When Naruto made the hand sign that they had agreed on, INO eased her sword back into the scabbard and relaxed slightly. "Oi, so things been quiet?" Naruto asked, plopping down across from her and producing a cup of his nearly infamous instant ramen. "Yeah," INO agreed, rolling her eyes as she turned back to poking at the fire absently. "Hey, Naruto, do you think we'll really pass this exam?" "Of course," Naruto said enthusiastically without looking up from his preparations. "Shino keeps saying we has the best time. We don't have to worry about losing our spots in the final exam or nothing." "Aha," INO said, looking up. "But only the 4 teams with the best time and all their scrolls can pass, remember. How do we know for sure that we're going to pass?" "Oi, INO, just have some faith, okay?" Naruto said, flashing her his trademark grin. "I mean, Shino's really smart, and you're really good too. We'll be fine." Snorting in exasperation, INO rolled her eyes and turned back to the fire. He had said that last night as well. Then again, she had been worrying last night too, which made her wonder why she instinctively waited to talk to Naruto about her worries instead of Shino. Then, like every time she wondered, she realized the answer: Shino was very clinical about things and he never tried to reassure her. Naruto was still realistic, but he always reassured her. Glancing up, she almost blushed at how the light from the fire highlighted his face. Shaking that off, INO sighed and threw her stick on the fire. "I'm going to bed." "Or WW, but you haven't even tried to guess my secret yet," Naruto said teasingly. INO blinked, then snapped her fingers. It had totally slipped her mind. It had started shortly after the first test, but INO had been trying and failing to guess his real secret. Although, he did keep offering to tell his secret if INO would tell hers, which she refused to do. Studying the blonde intently for a moment, INO grinned and pointed at him. "I know. You're really Anko's son." "Oh. You guessed that at lunch yesterday," Naruto said, grinning as he started on his ramen. "Oh," INO said, shrugging. "How about you're really a kami?" "Nope. A Gaki. Hell no. Sasuke-kun's bastard brother. Fuck no." Naruto shouted, choking on his ramen. "Please just tell me already," INO said crankily, unable to believe she couldn't figure this out. "Okay," Naruto said firmly. "Just as soon as you tell me your secret." "Good night," INO said curtly and then got up from the fireside and lay down on her sleeping mat. No way in hell was she going to tell that bastard her secrets. They were for her to know and for him to never find out. Rolling away from him, she closed her eyes as all of the mental stress and fatigue of the day carried her easily to sleep. Usually, that would be the end of a person's problems, but not so for a Yamanaka. They had lucid dreams of stray memories from minds they had been in. It was the way their minds coped with the family jutsu. Last night, she had dreamed about the childhood of one of the examiners. Tonight was different. It didn't feel like a dream, though it was lucid. It held none of the feel of a dream, nor did it feel like a memory. It felt more like her own mind was trying to make something comprehensible. At first, there was nothing but darkness, sheer, inescapable darkness. Then, a distant sound reached her. As the darkness faded, like a film being brought into focus, vague forms took shape around her, and, soon enough, she could see that she was in a nighttime forest. Then, the noise sharpened to a dull whisper and suddenly the echoing sound of screams and shouts reached her. They were wordless, meaningless, but she knew that they were the screams of people dying. Instinctively, INO tried to wake up, but instead she was drawn as if by some unseen force toward the noise. And that was when she noticed the odd, unnatural red glow that highlighted the sky. Before she could ponder the implications of that, she was hurled from the confines of the forest and out onto a ledge that overlooked Konoha, and terror gripped her heart. Every child had heard the story, seen renditions of that night, but INO, like others, had never really believed that the horror had been so great. Now laid out before her was the beast in all of its dark glory. Buildings were burning, and that unearthly red fire kept growing higher and brighter, spreading despite the best efforts of the ninja. The odor of charred wood and flesh permeated the air, even up so high the strength of it almost choking her. Worst of all, however, were the screams, the cornucopia of pain, raw and bloody. They echoed forever, etching themselves into her memory, despite her attempts to block them out. And then, through the flames and smoke, she saw it. It was massive. No, it was gigantic. Its sheer size should have been impossible. The fur looked as if it was anything but natural, the fangs were vicious and jagged. There was a faint whistling in the air, created by the nine tails as they slashed through buildings with ease and toppled a nearby mountain, along with the massive village walls. The QB. INO whispered, eyes wide and body frozen in terror. And then, that massive head turned towards her, those eyes glowing bright in the night, its mouth gaping open to allow the single most evil growl she could imagine escape and reverberate through the air. It made her blood turn to ice, and she collapsed like a puppet that had her strings cut, feeling as if her bladder would give out at any moment. Suddenly, INO knew exactly what this monster was. It was a fox. It was a demon. It was death and destruction. It was unstoppable. Help, INO whimpered. And then, suddenly, with a jerk, she was awake. Blinking rapidly, her skin clammy and her mind almost panicked. It took her what felt like a lifetime to realize that Naruto was hovering over her, his hand on her shoulder. Oi, INO, you okay? Naruto said worriedly. You were thrashing around for a while, and then got really still and started. Oh no, crying. INO opened her mouth to shout at him that she had not been crying, but realized that she couldn't form any words. She couldn't remember how to talk. Her terror had been so deep that she had been reduced to a wild animal. What had her mind been trying to understand that it would so terrify her with every Konoha nin's worst nightmare? Hey, say something, Naruto said, his own tone almost panicked while he patted her cheek softly. She stared at him for the longest moment, wondering at the warmth of his hand. INO, come on. This isn't funny. I'm fine, INO finally said, reaching up to move his hand away from her cheek, only to marvel at the feel of it in her hand. I was just having a nightmare. You sure? Naruto asked in concern, looking dubious, apparently unconcerned that she was holding his hand. Yeah, I'm sure. INO said and then smiled, toying with one of his fingers absently before letting his hand go. If a girl didn't know better, she could think you liked her. In response, INO was treated to the unusual sight of Naruto blushing. I was just worried. He snapped and then, getting up, stormed away from her. INO chuckled for a moment, then felt her body go slack from lack of tension, allowing her to slump back onto her sleeping mat. Then, in the ethereal calm that had descended over her, INO wondered why exactly she had never before noticed how nicely Naruto's nose was shaped. Rolling over, she closed her eyes, but she knew that sleep would not return to her, so instead she began to think about what could have brought on her dream. It was a long night. Gaara hated people. It was an unspoken fact. Generally, the only reason he existed was to hate and kill. Love of the self, that was his entire existence. Someday, he knew that he would eventually turn on Kankuro and Temari, would use his sand to slowly crush the life out of them. His father would be first, however, then maybe the rest of the village. Then, Kankuro and Temari. Another genin had called Gaara insane once. Right up until the sand had drunk his blood. Idiot, challenging us head-on. Gaara opened his eyes, lifting his head to stare impassively at the rain genin in front of him. It was curious, he had killed who knew how many stone and grass teams, more than a few leaf and other teams. Yet, this was the only rain team they had encountered. How would they scream? Would they scream, as his sand crushed them? Lost in his thoughts, he paid no attention as Kankuro started talking, saying something about how pointless fighting was a waste of time. It doesn't matter, Gaara interrupted, staring at the men across from him in something that approached contempt. All that appear in front of me must die. The rain nin's face purple in anger, and he pulled various umbrellas from his back, shouting about something, but Gaara watched in utter boredom, as they were launched and the man started his attack. In the second it took for the thousands of needles to sail through the air to kill him, Gaara had crossed his arms and allowed his mother to appear like magic to encase him in safety. Impossible. The rain ninja said in surprise as the needles thudded into the sand barrier and ground around him. Is that it? Gaara asked with restrained glee. It was time. He could hear his mother asking for blood, demanding it, and he was ready to let her have it. I guess I'll have to make it rain blood. Gaara watched intently. It was interesting to see the faces of those he would kill right before they realized they were dead. Some would tremble, some would stand their ground, some like the rain nin now rushing him minus would attack. Not that it mattered, Gaara always won, and his existence always continued. With very little interest in the catching of the man, Gaara watched as he was jerked to a stop by the sand as it swirled around his legs. Slowly it climbed and clumped over the man, encasing him so tightly that he could barely breathe, and the only thing to show was his face. Gaara liked to watch the faces of his victims, the futile hope and desperation as they were crushed to death. Stretching his hand out towards the shocked, and now minus terrified ninja, he slowly clenched his hands, causing the sand to compact. The rain ninja grimaced, and then screamed outright as his bones were slowly broken and then crushed. Gaara regarded the man for a moment, his head tilting to the side, dissatisfied with the lack of begging, and abruptly tightened his hand into a complete fist, causing the sand to finish its gruesome work. With a loud crunch, the man was killed, a rain of blood showering the area save for Gaara, who causally used his sand to shield himself. Desert graveyard, Gaara said, feeling cheated at that man's apparent acceptance of death. Then, he remembered the other two rain ninja and he grinned, realizing that he had two more chances to feel the satisfaction he had been denied. He saw the terror, the horror etched in their faces, as they suddenly realized he was staring at them. They tried to placate him, but Gaara was not to be soothed like Kankuro. Within minutes he had guided his sand up both, entrapping them tightly. Both arms held before him, he listened to their screams and shrieks of pain in something he could only assume was pleasure. Bye-bye, Temari said, her voice falsely cheery. As he clenched both of his hands, suddenly both ninja in a cornucopia of noise and blood died painfully, giving him a taste of the satisfaction he sought. Still, as he relaxed his arms, he felt incomplete. None of them had truly fought back. Struggled, and only two has him crush their hope. They had been pitiful and he detested their blood mixing with his sand. Let's head to the toe minus. Shut up, Gaara whispered, the voice of his mother demanding more blood and telling him there was one nearby that could be enough. That could give him the long sought for sensations, the feeling of his existence being worth something. Let's stop, Kankuro said, placating. After all, Temari wants to be a tune-in. Gaara shifted his gaze from the black-garbed puppeteer to the girl, who, according to others, was pretty, and then looked in the direction that his sand was demanding of him. You've killed 10 or 15 teams, isn't that enough? Kankuro tried to reason, his tone soothing. Gaara could sense the fear, the terror barely held in check. The puppet user was aware of how easily Gaara could and would kill him if it suited him. Coward. Don't say such cold things, Temari interjected, her tone pleading. Looking at her, he saw her forced smile, and the hands in front of her as if trying to stop his attack. Listen to your sister, okay? Plus, if we pass soon, you'll get to see really strong people. And prove your existence, right? Please. Gaara felt his mother raging that a person that could have given his existence meaning had left, and part of him felt like crushing Temari. Instead he reached out and reformed the cork to his gourd of sand, silently filling it up once more. Finished, he allowed the cork to return to its home and then glared at Temari and Kankuro. Fine. Gaara decided to kill both of them before he killed his father. Anko wondered how she had let herself get talked into this, then remembered it had of course been Kakashi who had managed it. Still, in her opinion, it was a stupid assignment and a waste of her skills. After all, there was quite a bit going on at the moment. Unity, the latest Uchiha/Hyuga fight, the military build UPS in stone and grass, and the oh-so-fun arguments between the Hokage and the Uchiha over Kakashi's eye. So yes, as far as Mitarashi Anko was concerned, in comparison with those situations, patrolling the Forest of Death for a member of some mysterious group called Akatsuki was stupid. Of course, such thoughts could be because despite her talent, skill, intelligence and killer body minus, he did not have the patience to deal with ghost enemies. She needed tangible and real threats, Unity, for example, or her sensei, even. Something she could make bleed. Still, it hadn't been a complete waste of time. She had gotten to see Naruto and his team fight, after all. It was obvious, of course, that Naruto was the strongest of the three, but the other two were no slouches and most importantly, they functioned very well together. Even her backup, Din and Garo, two Unbu trainees, had been suitably impressed at the display. Besides that small moment of interest, however, the patrol had been boring as hell. They had yet to see another team after Naruto's, and there had been no contact with the other patrols, which wasn't surprising really. Anko was almost tempted to think that the Hokage and Kakashi had come up with this just to keep her busy. It seemed like something they would do. Coming to a stop, Anko crouched, studying the forest in annoyance. Sector 3 clear, Bin said casually from her right. Anko-sama, isn't it odd that we haven't made contact with another team? Not really, Anko said without looking away from the forest. The Forest of Death is a large area, even with 5 active patrols contact is almost impossible to accomplish. Yes. But I meant the Chunin examinees, Din said, assuming a crouching position as well. Besides Team 9, we've yet to see another team. I think, even for the size of this forest, that is unusual. Anko snorted, then glanced at the trainee. You has a point there, but I can't find it in myself to care too much. After all, fewer teams means better odds for Naruto and the others. Yes. But what if minus? Hey, what's Harate-san doing here? Garo suddenly interrupted and Anko turned her attention away from Din and to the still-standing trainee. Noticing her attention, Garo nodded slightly at the distant figure of a passing Harate. Anko felt the hair on the back of her neck bristle slightly, knowing that there was no reason for that man to be in this forest. More important was the fact that he was not moving like Harate, he was moving too much like him to be a coincidence. Which meant several things, none of which were good. I thought he was on Medi minus. Vin, Garo, Anko said abruptly without looking at either ninja. Go find Itaki and tell him to get his ass over here quickly. I think we've found our Akatsuki. But, Anko-sama, that's Harate-san. No. It only looks like him, Anko said, standing up once more, eyes following his path. The easiest way of entering the enemy's stronghold is to do so in a familiar guise. Wolf in sheep's clothing, Garo summarized, sounding impressed. Exactly, Anko said in annoyance. So get your asses in gear and get him here. I'll need more than just 2 recruits in a fight with someone of this level. He didn't seem that strong to me, Din said. Then you don't need to be an Unbu, Anko snapped. He's Sanin level. So get out of here. That finally seemed enough to send the two scurrying away, allowing Anko to follow Harate. I've waited too long for this. You're not getting away from me. Sensei. Shino could feel them. They were closing in. He didn't need his family to tell that much. These 3 were either not the best of ninja, or very confident. Pretending to ignore them for the moment, he turned his head slightly, checking on his teammates. INO looked a tad worn down from lack of sleep, and Naruto seemed distracted. He knew better though. INO was always aware of the small things and Naruto always seemed ready no matter how distracted he was. Still, it was possible that INO might not be awake enough to know, so he dropped back, keeping his tone low. INO-san. Do you sense them? Ho. The blonde girl blinked, looking at him curiously, and he sighed. The enemy. They're preparing to attack. Oh. INO managed, but Shino saw the way her eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't known, which meant he had probably averted her death by alerting her. Looking at Naruto, he started to say something when he saw the intense and cold look settling onto the boy's face. They're splitting up for a 3-point pincer move, 2 from the side and 1 from below. How do you know that? INO demanded hotly, looking at him. The weak always try to kill the strong by dividing their strength, Naruto said seriously, his tone almost a mirror of Anko's. A 3-point attack would work effectively for them in this situation, Shino said in agreement. 3 different directions means we'll each has to respond independently of each other, which can increase their chances of overpowering us. That's what I said. Naruto said, glaring at him. Shino felt something race up his spine, something he took correctly to be fear. That glare had been nothing but a promise of murder. Suddenly, Shino wondered if, maybe the real danger in this forest wasn't the other teams, but the obviously unstable boy they were working with. Beiso Kusa. With a deft move, Shino dodged the incoming attack, noting the half-dozen grass-like whips that seemed to come from everywhere in a crisscrossing fashion. A second later he dodged a small hail of three-bladed shuriken and created a wall of bugs to block the nin's incoming kick. Yet, even as the man retreated from the wall, Shino was surprised to hear INO cry out in pain. Turning quickly, he confirmed that the girl had been caught unaware by what appeared to be a bear trap made of leaves. INO, however, quickly lashed out with her sword, slicing it in half and countering her enemy's next attack. Pushing her to the back of his mind, Shino turned back to his own fight and just barely managed to leap back in time to avoid yet another grass-based ninjutsu. Landing, he found himself staring at a large Kusa nin, who seemed to be grinning, even though he should have had no basis for it. "You seem amused by something. Hey, should I tell you?" the boy said, lunging forward with a powerful swing, which was turned aside by his bugs grasping the arm and diverting it. "I would like to know," Shino said as blandly as ever. "Hey, okay. After we kill you, we'll has killed a total of 5 teams. That's one more over the other Kusa teams." Shino felt his eyes widen at the implication, unable to believe that there were teams intentionally roaming the forest looking for others to kill. Still, he stayed in the present and dodged yet another grass jutsu with a carefully timed Kai clone. The man backed off for a moment, surprise on his face followed by what looked like amusement. "So, you're not as pathetic as the other teams, ho. This should be fun." Shino in response held his hands out, allowing a swarm of bugs to come swirling out. Thump. 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 Naruto could hear his heartbeat pounding furiously in his ears, could feel the excitement of battle flowing through his body. This was the moment he was coming to love, the oblivion of it all, the way the entire world went away as he fought. It was almost surreal, and he couldn't help but grin like Anko usually did. Twisting his way out of yet another grass-based attack, he launched his own attack in the form of kunai and shuriken. He was rewarded with the sight of forcing his enemy, the all-too-familiar Noga, to flee to a safer location. Still airborne, Naruto created a cave bunshine and used it as a springboard, dropping toward his surprised enemy. Kunai clashed with the scraping of metal and Noga was driven to his knees, while Naruto flipped forward and landed in a crouch, a kick slamming into the Kusa genin's back. Turning, his grin faded as the genin suddenly crumbled to reveal that it had been a Kusa bunshine. "Is that all you have?" Noga said from somewhere among the foliage. "Is that the strength that'll make you the disease of Hokiv? Oi, you think you're so damn bad? Why don't you face me?" Naruto shouted in response, eyes darting all around him in an attempt at locating his enemy. "Why should I? I'm a true shinobi, we don't fight in the open," Noga echoed back. "Oi, or maybe you're just a coward," Naruto said, clutching his kunai tighter. "Is that it? Are you afraid of the disease? You expect that to work on me? I am not some simple-minded buffoon," Noga shouted, even as a half-dozen grass-like whips seemed to come from everywhere in a crisscrossing fashion. "Beiso Kusake." Naruto in response dodged and weaved his way through the attack, hurling kunai into the foliage where the first grass whip had come from. "As if that would work," Noga taunted from his hiding place. "Even if I was there, those kunai could be avoided easily." Minus the proud voice was cut off, however, as the sound of several explosions rent the air and the section he had just attacked was left in ruins. "Oi, I may not be able to see you, but sooner or later, I can blow you up," Naruto taunted back, eyes darting all around wondering where the hell Noga was, and then he felt it, the danger sense that he had spent so long cultivating under Anko. It was a moment too late, he'd been caught flat-footed and a grass whip was suddenly protruding through his chest. "So dies a Hokiv," Noga cackled, finally leaving his hiding spot. "Now I wonder who will minus." "Oi, excuse me," Naruto suddenly said from behind the gloating boy, followed by a swift kick to the boy's head. "Do you mind? I'm sorta mourning my bunshine there." Tumbling to a stop, Noga blinked in surprise, then looked around just in time to see the Naruto that was impaled puff out of existence. How? Impossible. That couldn't have been a cave bunshine. I had you. "Well," Naruto said with a prickish grin as he drew a kunai. "I make a lot of 'em. And, oi, a real shinobi can kawari me without missing a beat." "So I see," Noga hissed, climbing to his feet while shaking his head as if to clear it. "Good," Naruto said, going serious. It was time he showed this little bastard the truth of what it meant to fight a Konoha ninja, a future Hokiv. "Now, do you really want to see my strength, Noga?" "Show me your strength, Hokiv," Noga said intently, "and I'll show you it's nothing." Naruto wasted no time charging across the clearing ready for the attack, willing it to come so that he could perform the heavy and end this fight. Instead, he was suddenly forced to leap aside and back to avoid a whip that seemed to have formed around Noga's hand. Missing its target, the whip connected with a tree, crowding out several sections of bark. Watching intently, Naruto followed the recoil of the weapon and then glanced at his opponent, noting that the whip seemed to be protruding directly from his hand. "My personal attack," Noga said with a grin. "The rake. The thorns are twice as sharp as kunai and coated with enough poison to kill you before you can blink." "Really? Let's test that," Naruto said in response and darted forward once more, ducking the first slash at his head, then the return slash at his legs with a jump and a flip. His hand grabbed the vine between the thorns and yanked. The end result was Noga being pulled forward, surprise etched on his face, and Naruto slamming his other fist into the boy's face with a crunch. His reeling away pulled the whip taut, and Naruto was quick to produce a kunai to slice it in half. Discarding the portion he had been holding, Naruto darted forward once more, ducking yet another slash at his head using heavy style, and then to Noga's mounting confusion reappeared with a knee slamming into the Kusa genin's stomach. Noga stumbled away once more, one hand clutching his stomach while the other clutched his face. Naruto, however, was already on the move and, grabbing the boy's arm, yanked him around to slam into a tree. "Oof," Noga managed before an elbow slammed into his jaw and the arm that had been using the whip was yanked to the side painfully. "So, a hokid is nothing," Naruto hissed, the cloth on the handle of the kunai twisting in his grip as he pressed the cold tip of the kunai to the boy's throat. "A pathetic disease. You told me something once. I think it was conquer fear. They should fear you." "A cage," Noga hissed, glaring at him, "is nothing." "So are you," Naruto whispered and then, without warning, yanked the kunai away from the boy's throat and jabbed it into the outstretched wrist. Then, despite Noga's scream, he followed the motion with a twisting slash, so that he yanked his kunai free in a spray of blood. The resulting scream was oddly satisfying, as was Noga collapsing to the ground, desperately trying to stop the blood flow from his now ruined hand. Naruto, however, turned his gaze away from the boy, suddenly remembering that he was not the only one out here fighting. It took him a moment to find Shino's fight, and he was annoyed to find that they were doing little more than jumping around. Hell, had they even exchanged attacks? Snorting in annoyance, Naruto turned away from the boy and attempted to locate INO. He did so just in time to find INO stumbling back from her opponent, the ninja 2 sticking almost comically from the Kusa nin's chest. So enthralled by what he saw, Naruto barely noticed when Noga shouted for a retreat, barely noticed as the ninja Shino had been fighting scurried away, or the way Shino just stared after them. As he watched the ninja finally topple over, one part of him couldn't help but wonder if that was what his own first kill had looked like. The other wondered if it had been INO's first kill. And, when he saw her collapse and heard her muttering that it was an accident, he had his answer. Suddenly, he felt a leaden weight settle into his stomach, then, against his will, he started towards her. "It was an accident," INO said softly, staring at the ninja 2 plunged into the prone body. She stumbled back and collapsed with a thump, eyes never leaving the figure. Her mind was replaying the moment, his wild slash at her throat, her smooth duck and lunge. The sound of surprise that had coursed through her, the way the blood had coiled down the blade. Dimly, she was aware of someone approaching from behind, and then crouching next to her. Turning, she found herself staring into Naruto's blue eyes. He was studying her, and then, he looked at what she had done. Some part of INO wanted to make him not see it, to hide it. Instead, she watched him, the way he studied her kill in silence, his face a mask. Finally he turned back to her, his blue eyes revealing shadows of emotions that she could just barely fathom. It was a gaze that, under normal circumstances, would make her blush and stammer. For now it gave her something to latch onto, something to hold, the urge to break down completely and lose it at bay. "You did great," Naruto said softly, his tone seemingly more intimate than she had imagined possible. "I killed him," INO said, her eyes burning from the tears she was trying so hard to stop. "Yeah," Naruto said while nodding curtly in agreement. "Still, better him than you. I shouldn't have." INO mumbled, choking back a sob. Naruto was silent for a long moment and then sighed, looking back at the body. "We kill. They kill. It's one of the first things we learn." INO froze for a moment, staring at the blade, and then up at him, the way he carried himself. The way he spoke. The look on his face, in those eyes. Suddenly INO knew Naruto had already been through this. Had already stained his hands with blood. It can't be that easy. It is, Naruto said, looking back at her, trying so hard to give her a reassuring look. Ninja, even Hokages has to kill. It's our art. We just has to live with it. Getting up, he approached the body and pulled her sword free before coming back to offer it to her. I can't. INO said, looking away, ashamed and revolted. Oi, INO. You has to. You're a ninja now, Naruto said, squatting to put the sword on the ground in front of her. When she turned to stare at him, he gave her a small, proud smile. Next time that bastard says you're not, you can prove it. INO nodded slightly, allowing the slight against Sasuke to pass, and reaching out with a trembling hand to grasp the handle of the ninjutsu. Climbing to her feet alongside Naruto, she felt lost, and the sword no longer felt right to her. Was this what it was like to take a life? To feel as if nothing in the world was right anymore. Turning, INO studied the blonde next to her, seeing for a moment the man he would become. Naruto-kun, she paused at her own voice, surprised at how calm and steady it sounded. When he turned to look at her in surprise, she continued with her question. What was it like? Your first kill. INO saw the way his face tightened. It was almost invisible really, the way his shoulders tensed and his eyes dimmed slightly. INO regretted asking now. She should have known better, but he was the only one present that had taken a life, and she needed to know. Needed to know that all of the horror, the fear and pride she felt was normal. It was beautiful, INO-chan, Naruto finally said, his tone rough and strained as he turned away from her. It was beautiful. INO watched in silence as he walked away and then looked down at the still, bloodied sword in her hand. Almost mechanically, she fumbled to the cleaning cloth Harate had given her and began to wipe the blade clean, struggling desperately to see through her tears. I'm a ninja now, INO managed in a steady voice despite her tears, and then with a flourish she sheathed the weapon and joined Naruto. The forest was quiet, for the most part at least. Here and there were cicadas and other insects starting their twilight songs, joined by the sound of the whistling wind and the rustling of swaying branches. The cloud-spotted sky was actually sort of interesting. It held a note of light and dark blues which signaled the beginning of night, and on the horizon, of the trees to the west, it was a mixture of peach and white. Combined, it gave the forest a sort of gloomy and forlorn feeling which would serve to unnerve even most ninja, to be honest. After all, there was a reason why it was called the Forest of Death and not the Forest of Warm, Fuzzy Thoughts, namely because it was where the Kyuubi had first assaulted Konoha. It still carried an unwavering taint of the beast, much like how a few places that were connected with the Yondem still carried his trace. Damn, it's getting dark, Anko muttered to herself, pouring on an extra burst of speed. The last thing she wanted to do was try and fight him in the dark. Snakes operated best in the dark, after all. Still, she would have given almost anything to know why he was even in this area or part of that Akatsuki group, but that was not really important. What was important was the fact that he had obviously killed Harate. After all, Orochimaru was not one to leave someone around to ruin his fun. Anko noticed the trap at the last second, grasping a jutting branch and swinging around and up to avoid the explosive note that had been directly in her path. Glaring down at it with narrowed eyes, she snorted in annoyance. Who the hell does he think I am? As if I'd fall for that. Then, like it was yesterday, she felt the familiar tingle of his chakra and moved, just as some unknown jutsu decimated the branch she had just been on. The explosion, of course, set off the poorly hidden, yet surprisingly powerful, explosive note which forced Anko's body to jerk out of control and slam into another branch stomach first. It almost crippled her. If the blood in her mouth was any indication, she had at least had some internal trauma now. Still, she was Mitarashi Anko Tonin of Konoha, former Unbu. She was not going to stop after this. Clutching at the tree, she swung her legs forward and then backward into a flip, so that she landed upright in a flutter of her overcoat. To complete her look of awesomely cool, she licked the blood on her chin away, and grinned at the impassive-looking Harate on a branch across from her. You really know how to get a girl's interest, sensei. Kukuki, Harate managed with a very snake-like smile. I knew there was someone following me. This really is becoming a reunion, isn't it? Yeah, Anko agreed gruffly, losing her playful manner. So, why are you here? To try and assassinate the Hokages, or something pedophilic? None of the former, since I has no interest in old men, Harate said, an unusually long tongue lolling out to lick at his lips. Maybe a bit of the latter, you know me and children. You really are sick, Anko muttered, eyes narrowed. Even though we haven't seen each other for a while, Harate said, reaching up to casually peel away the flesh of his face and reveal purple tattoos and yellow, snake-like eyes. You're so cold. My sweet little viper. Orochimaru, Anko said darkly, wondering despite herself how someone who should have been in his 50s could look as if he had not aged since reaching adulthood. I am not your viper anymore. Oh. Anko, the Sanin said in a mocking fashion. You'll always be mine. Anko opened her mouth to retort when suddenly, a fiery pain exploded through her mind. Sweat formed on her skin, and she clutched at the cursed seal on her neck. Gone. Crouching down, Orochimaru grinned pleasantly. I guess I'll just have to remind you of that. And you know how I like to hear you scream. Chapter 17 Forest of Death, Unawaka. Location, Forest of Death, pre-dawn of the third day. Naruto grunted, rolling over on the sleeping mat, burying his face into the jacket/pillow. His face contorted into a grimace of displeasure as sweat beaded on his forehead and he rolled back over to stare at the brightening sky. He could hear his heart pounding in his ears and the ever-present phantom feeling of anger and fear. Concentrating on his breathing, he tried to calm down, hoping that he could get some sleep. It seemed hopeless. After all, he'd been up all night tossing and turning. It was like he was being chased by some invisible predator, unable to rest for a minute. He took 3 deep breaths and blinked rapidly to try to adjust his eyes to the dim darkness but couldn't. Closing his eyes once more, he sighed, preparing to attempt to sleep yet again, only to grimace as phantom pain flitted across his mind. Then, suddenly he exploded to his feet, clutching at his neck with one hand, mind-numbing pain racing through him, and the knowledge that Anko was hurt and in trouble. He tried to move only to stumble and collapse to his knees, staring sightlessly as a dark liquid dripped from his nose to splatter against the ground. Blood. Pain. Orochimaru. Naruto didn't know how, didn't know why, but there was no doubt in his mind that Anko was fighting Orochimaru. That she was losing and that he had to help her. Struggling to his feet, he darted into the forest, his own anger overriding any pain he felt, any fear. All that mattered was that he helped Anko, that the bastard who was hurting her paid. Without realizing it, his speed doubled and then tripled, leaving behind a wake of broken branches. Anko could feel him all around her, even over the pain of her broken ribs and dislocated shoulder. He was toying with her, she knew it, he loved to toy with people. Sick, perverted bastard, he was just getting his volleys before he killed her. Anko could stop running and deprive him of that thrill, but she had to keep buying time until Itaki and his team arrived. Taking a running jump, she plunged 20 feet, focusing desperately through her pain. Sparing a brief moment, she wondered where the hell Itaki was. After all, her 2 escorts had been sent off several hours ago. Suddenly a branch was beneath her, and she landed with a crouch, the jarring impact making her wince and stumble slightly. Getting back to her feet, she froze, eyes widening in fear and surprise at finding Orochimaru already there. He was casually leaning against the tree, a twisted smile on his face and yellow eyes glinting in the dim light. How nice of you to join me. Anko felt a shiver run up her spine, whether from fear or anger she didn't know, but it was obvious to her that Orochimaru was even stronger than when he had left. Still, she wouldn't roll over and cower. The days when she did that to him were long gone. Are you tired already? I think you used to, has more stamina. Well now, the Sanin said, pushing off the tree slightly. There's the viper I remember. Though, I agree, I did used to, has more stamina. I think it's my partner, however. That's not stimulating me. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm not a prepubescent brat. Anko hissed, eyes narrowing before she threw her hand out to launch a hail of deadly kunai at the twisted man, only to be forced into jumping as his tongue whipped toward her. Dodging that, she managed to fire off the kunai an instant before the tongue flicked around and grasped her wrist, yanking her off her feet and slamming her into the branch. Stunned, Anko shook her head, looking up at the so far unfazed Orochimaru. Recovering, she twisted her free hand, concentrating before thrusting her hand out. A second later, amid hissing and rustling clothes, snakes came hurtling from her sleeve and slammed fangs first into the startled-looking man. Anko couldn't help but smirk as she yanked him off his feet and then slung him around to slam into the tree. Sorry, Sensor, but I'm not that easy anymore. You'll always be ease minus, Orochimaru started to retort, only to widen his eyes as Anko slammed his hand into the tree with hers while plunging a kunai through both of their hands. Here, I'm going to borrow your hand. Anko gritted out, reaching out to grasp his other hand, before freezing as the figure melted into a black liquid. A replacement. Fuck. My. Not that bad. But still a bit pathetic. Orochimaru said from behind her. Only just now realizing that was my shadow. Konoha surely has fallen if they have to depend on ninja like you, my cast-offs. Twisting around, Anko stared in surprise at the man, then screamed out in pain as her cursed seal exploded into activity. With a sick ripping sound, the kunai ripped through her hand as Anko collapsed once more, clutching at the seal on her neck desperately. Kukugeki. Still loud as ever. I only hope the boy I met earlier isn't the same, Orochimaru taunted as he crouched down. Oh, now that I look closer. You seem jealous. Well, I can understand that, I suppose, since your looks has gone downhill. I am going to kill you. Anko hissed, only to freeze as he reached out to stroke her cheek in that hauntingly familiar way of a lover. Anko growled and turned her head, doing the only thing she could at the moment, biting his hand. Oh my, are you feeling that frisky? Orochimaru taunted, reaching out with his free hand to grab her jaw and free his hand. Just for old time's sake, I'll use my tongue. He licked his lips, his massive and distorted tongue snaking towards her. A second later, she was sent crashing into another tree, the tongue squeezing her neck before retracting. Kukuki. So, was it good for you? Coughing up blood, head feeling light, Anko pushed herself onto her hands and knees. Her arms trembling, she almost collapsed, but instead she struggled her way back to her feet. Panting heavily, she looked up at him, giving him a bloody grin. F4 play never was your thing. INO woke, a chill racing through her from the cool morning air. Stretching with a silent yawn, the kunoichi slapped her hand around to grab the sheath of her sword, and then sat up. Rubbing at her eyes tiredly, INO muttered to herself as her mind slowly sped back up from sleep. When it had a heavy weight seemed to settle into her chest, the memory of yesterday's kill still fresh. It had been bad enough yesterday that she hadn't been able to concentrate at all, forcing them to camp early. If it hadn't been for that, they probably could have reached the central tower last night. Every night in the forest was another night that a team could take their spot, which meant that if they failed she would be to blame. Guilt welling up inside her, INO groaned, covering her eyes, unable to help the urge to cry. She was too young for this pressure, and especially to deal with having taken a life. Then, dimly, she thought about the fact that Naruto was the same age as her and he was dealing with it. How? Frowning, she blinked and looked at his sleeping mat, wondering if she could ask him, only to find it empty. INO blinked, then slowly climbed to her feet and approached, wondering what was going on. Maybe he had gone to the bathroom. Or was out hunting. INO shook her head, knowing better. He would have left a cave bunshine like last time, which didn't leave too many options really. INO felt her heart starting to hammer against her ribs, an unnamed fear welling up inside her. If he had been attacked and killed. Eyes darting around nervously, her mind began to play one gruesome scene after another until she began marching around the clearing, turning this way and that, looking for some sign of what had happened to the blonde. Now roll to her, INO cried out suddenly, cupping her hands to her mouth. There was a slight echo, and then, after it faded, nothing. Taking a deeper breath, she shouted once more and, when that provided no answer, she attempted it over and over. INO-san, Shino said, sitting up from his sleeping mat. It may not be wise to be shouting in such a fascio minus. Naruto-kun-'s missing. INO snapped, rounding on the boy with enough hostility to make him flinch. All his stuff is here, but he's just gone. INO-san, it is possible that he is just out hunting or using the bathroom, Shino offered calmly, climbing to his feet so that they were at eye level. INO sighed heavily, folding her arms under her breasts, as she frowned. Do you really think that he'd just go off on his own? INO asked. Like, he left one of those cave bunshines of his yesterday, when he went off. True, Shino allowed hesitance in his voice. However, I doubt anything too serious occurred to him. But it's possible. INO snapped. He is the #1 genin. The #1 Konoha genin, INO corrected in aggravation. Another village's #1 could has ambushed him, or. INO paled, reaching up to cup her mouth. INO-san, please get a hold of your emotions, Shino said in what passed as annoyance to him. This emotional attachment you've formed with Naruto-san minus. What are you talking about? INO asked, fixing her gaze on the boy. You've grown emotionally attached to Naruto, Shino explained tiredly. Due to the fact that you experienced a semi-traumatic event yesterday, namely the taking of a life. The attachment and your refusal to let the event go is impairing your judgment. First off, INO growled, closing the gap between them, excuse me for not being a robot. And second off, it's called being a teammate to be emotionally attached to each other. Naruto minus is our teammate. INO snapped, jabbing Shino in the chest with her finger. He may has a few problems, but at least he really cares about us. So, we are going to go look for him, we will find him, and if you don't help, then may the Amatsukami help you. Someone should wait for him, as Shino started to say, only to pause at INO's fixed glare. Sighing, he held an arm out, allowing several bugs to escape into the air in different directions. After a moment, he nodded and gestured to the right. I'll take point. They say Naruto-san went this way around dawn. Ducking a feeble slash at his face, Orochimaru just barely bit back his annoyance. This fight had dragged on longer than he intended for a brief distraction. After all, he was on a schedule, and the leader of the Akatsuki was rather annoying about such things. Leaning back from another slash, he lashed out, one hand grabbing her arm while the other grasped her throat in a vice-like grip. I'm sorry to say this, but we has to stop. I'm running behind, Orochimaru said, locking eyes with hers. It would all be over now, and he could continue on his way and meet up with the intended target. So focused was he on his former student and his meeting for the day, he barely noticed the feeling of lances of chakra slamming into him. His mind supplied the name of the technique almost instantly, Kaneshibari, no jutsu, minus a split second before his eyes caught the movement of something orange hurtling at him. Needless to say, Orochimaru was impressed. The impact from the blow wrenched his arm out of its socket, allowing Anko to collapse to the ground in a heap. Orochimaru, however, was busy thinking about the one responsible for that attack, namely the orange-clad ninja who was crouching slightly with familiarly wild blonde hair and odd whisker marks on his face. An Inuzuka. No, they had darker hair and never went anywhere without a dog. But he was wearing a konoha forehead protector. Oh, curious. More important, however, was the fact that the Kaneshibari was already fading. Obviously, this mysterious child had very little practice in applying it. Still, it had been enough to get one good shot in, and the Sannin prepared to compliment the blonde, only to be caught short as the boy shifted his weight and charged at him with surprising speed. Orochimaru was not a Sannin, nor an S-ranked criminal, for nothing, and he neatly dodged the incoming attack. In that moment, however, he found himself staring into the eyes of a killer, which piqued his interest. Then the boy rounded on the ball of his foot, shifted his weight, and came within a hair's breadth of hitting him in the chest with a kunai. Leaping away from the boy, the older ninja paused. The way the boy had shifted his weight was far too familiar to be coincidence. Kukugeki. You are a spirited one, Orochimaru said, eyes narrowing as he felt the boy's intent growing. Do you has a name? Azumaki Naruto. The blonde spat, crouching slightly. I'm going to kill you. Oh. The Sannin asked conversationally, eyes widening in mock surprise. Could I ask why, exactly, you want to do that? Because, Naruto said, his hands shooting forward to hurl a barrage of kunai at him, you hurt Nichan. Orochimaru thought about retorting, but decided instead to study how the blonde had thrown the weapons. With that, the killer look, and the way he moved, there was now very little doubt in his mind that this Naruto had been trained in the heavy style, unrefined though it seemed. It was obvious that Anko had been playing sensor, which meant they were connected with the Kinbaku, as that was the only reason to this boy to show up from nowhere. With a quick shunshine out of the line of attack, he grinned, deciding to share one of his favorite attacks with the boy, Shikimi no Jutsu. He was feeling sentimental, after all, and this Naruto was, in a way, his grandchild. It took very little effort to launch, as always it was so easy to capture people in his killer intent. He was so busy gloating about this, Orochimaru, the S-class criminal, made a very foolish mistake. Yes, the Shikimi no Jutsu had until this point in time worked for the most part flawlessly. However, this was the first time he had ever tried it on a genin who had accepted his eventual death so thoroughly that he simply ignored the jutsu and continued charging full speed at him, a wordless scream of rage echoing in the air, as he jumped and came down with a kunai aimed at the Sannin's face. Orochimaru, due to sheer experience and reflexes, realized his mistake and, despite his shock, managed to lift his arms in an X block, which resulted in the force of the blow sending the infamous traitor skidding backwards slightly, his arm now pierced by a blade. Eyes wide, Orochimaru looked at the blonde across from him in something akin to horror. No genin had ever shrugged the shikimi off so completely, let alone actually managed to hurt him. Not in all of his 50 years. Part of Orochimaru, the part that had kept him alive for so long, told him that he needed to kill this child now before he became an even bigger threat. The other part, the part that had made him feared, and led him to create so many forbidden jutsu, said that should leave him alive to see how he evolved. Orochimaru was so lost in his thoughts and musings that he nearly missed the blonde charging at him yet again. Narrowing his yellow eyes, Orochimaru watched the boy as what little grace that had been present earlier was tossed out the window. It seemed that he would have to forget about his schedule. This child was proving far more interesting than he had first expected. The incoming attack proved silly and he struck out at the boy, expecting it to be a cave bunshine, because that would be an obvious choice to this child's apparent skill level. He was wrong, as the Naruto he hit became a log and he grinned, slightly amused that a child could move so quickly as to replace himself against him. A second later, he heard the familiar whistling of kunai, and turned to see a whole storm of them sailing at him, each fluttering attack behind them thrown by at least 20 clones from each direction. Jumping and weaving, he danced away from the exploding blades, looking around in curiosity. He was not surprised that there was being herded away from Anko, but he was surprised when he suddenly sensed more kunai from behind him. Sparing a glance over his shoulder, he raised an eyebrow at the sheer number of clones and kunai hurtling at him. Unexpected, Orochimaru admitted before jumping onto the branch of a tree to avoid the massive explosion that rocked the ground. A second later, he spotted what had to be the real Naruto moving around in the trees above him and extended his arm to grasp the boy and yank him down. He nearly sensed the trap too late, and just barely had time to release the Naruto he was holding before it exploded. "Here I come, you bastard!" One of the Narutos shouted, and the entire horde came rushing toward him from below, the sides and the treetops. It seemed he was utterly surrounded and defeated. Orochimaru, however, smirked and oh so casually merged with the tree he was in, allowing it to absorb the damage to him. When the attacks finally tapered off, Orochimaru emerged partially from the tree to keep them in one area. Then, with a sunshine, he was behind them and expelling air and chakra, vaporizing the tree and all of those clones with a massive ball of flames. "Kukugeki, Anko, had a rather vicious student," Orochimaru said in delight. It had been interesting to see a genin already at that level. "Kaiton, senpu no koki yo." A voice from behind, distinctly Naruto, suddenly shouted, and Orochimaru turned in time to see a large whirlwind of leaves heading toward him. Orochimaru felt surprise course through him, knowing that technique, and knowing that it was rather dangerous since the edges of those leaves would be razor sharp. "Katen, Hosenka no jutsu." Orochimaru shouted, spitting forth multiple balls of fire at the whirlwind and blonde. The blonde dodged to the left, kicking off a tree for an extra burst of speed, and came hurtling toward him. Which was exactly what Orochimaru wanted, since in that instant of the blonde being airborne he formed the Tora seal and took a breath. Futon de topper. Naruto's face showed surprise, then determination, as he created his own Tora seal. Futon de topper. The resulting clash between the two forces of wind forced Orochimaru to cover his face and slide backward, even as trees bent and some even snapped in half. Debris and dust was kicked into the air, and above it all was the screaming rush of howling wind. As it died, the snake Sanin relaxed his guard, highly impressed at the result of that clash. But, where he had weathered the attack unscathed, Naruto was sprawled against a tree trunk, dazed and battered. Which meant it was time to end this. He had wasted too much time and effort on this already. Thrusting his hand forward, he grinned maliciously. "Senata Vashu." A second later, a dozen more snakes shot forward, twisting through the air to wrap around and bite into the blonde's flesh. "Ark!" Naruto screamed in surprise and pain. Orochimaru, however, yanked his arm around, pulling the boy into the air before slamming into one of the few remaining trees. The scream and blood that elicited was repeated as Orochimaru moved his arm around him, hitting everything in sight until at last the boy's body went limp. Releasing the blonde so that he landed on the ground with a dull thump, the Sanin chuckled. Turning to continue on his way, he paused, seeing Anko using a tree for support, blood leaking from her various wounds and, most importantly, glaring at him in impotent hatred. "Kukuku. What's with those hateful eyes?" When she didn't answer, he just grinned wider, amused at this. Then his amusement died as he felt a large amount of wicked chakra building behind him. Seeing the look of horror on Anko's face only made him more nervous. Turning despite his better judgment, He spotted the source of the chakra, which was actually quite obvious since tendrils of chakra were twisting and coiling in the air as it wrapped around the blonde. Naruto, chakra boiling, pushed himself to his hands and knees and then with a growl, lifted his head to stare at Orochimaru with crimson eyes and elongated irises. The whisker marks on his cheeks were darkening and widening. Even his various wounds healed at an alarming rate. This, Orochimaru said in amazement an instant before the blonde shot towards him with inhuman speed. Orochimaru just barely caught his arm in time to keep the claws from sinking all the way into his chest. "I'm going to kill you," Naruto hissed and then, without warning, lashed out with his other hand, flaying the Sanin's cheek an instant before Orochimaru sent him hurtling away. Clutching at his cheek and chest, applying what healing jutsu he could, Orochimaru suddenly felt an icy certainty race through him, and it had only one word. Vinchurikai. Anko wished she could look away, wished that she could turn off the Kinbaku no jutsu, but she couldn't. What was coming across the Kinbaku was too powerful to force it into silence, and watching the fight in front of her was too much like art, not to watch. Naruto tore his way through a series of Tsuchi Bunshine, clawed his way through a Doten Ritsudotinsha and scattered a Shuriken Cave Bunshine, no Jutsu, with a chakra-infused scream. Nothing Orochimaru threw at the blonde seemed to work. It was almost like Naruto was an unstoppable juggernaut. Part of her hoped and prayed that Naruto could kill Orochimaru. She wanted that desperately. Another part of her just hoped that the anger, hate, pain and dark fury would stop coming across the link between them. The vast majority of her, however, hated herself for not being able to do anything to help Naruto. Her body had been pushed to the breaking point when the blonde had arrived. The pain was too much for her even to push through. Indeed, it had taken her the majority of the fight between Orochimaru and Naruto just to get her body to stand. As it was, if she forced herself into this fight, in this condition she would get herself, and possibly Naruto, killed. So, all she could do at the moment was watch. There was a clash. Orochimaru had been too slow, and now he was bleeding. Another clash. Now it was Naruto who was bleeding for the moment, then another and another, a rapid exchange of blows. Anko almost didn't see it, but she did, and she tried to move, but her legs gave out and it was too late. Suddenly Naruto was being held aloft, his upper body bound tightly by an elongated arm and a tongue that was wrapped around his throat and holding his jacket up. The look on Orochimaru's face told her just how painful and how much of a struggle it was to hold the boy in that position. Naruto was kicking and struggling, and inch by inch, he was forcing his way free, the odd design on his stomach looking as if it was burning its way through his skin. Orochimaru flashed his free hand through a series of complicated seals before the tips began to glow. "Dogyo o Fuin!" Orochimaru shouted, slamming his glowing fingers into Naruto's stomach. There was a flash of light, and the chakra flickered and then died, but Naruto continued to struggle. Orochimaru seemed annoyed by that development and formed another seal before smacking his palm against the boy's forehead. "Shunmin Fuin!" Anko watched in silence as the blonde's head lolled slightly, as consciousness was forced into a state of sleep. Naruto was at the man's mercy, they were all alone. And Orochimaru wasn't letting the blonde go. Panic and fear welled up inside her, and she didn't realize what she was doing until she was within an arm's reach of the two. A second later, Orochimaru's hand smashed into her cheek with enough force to send her skidding along the ground before crashing against a tree. Looking up, hurting in countless ways, she stretched her hand out feebly toward Naruto. This didn't go unnoticed by Orochimaru, who glanced at her and then at the blonde he was holding aloft before chuckling darkly. "You should thank me," Anko-chan, the Sanin said, casually taking one of the kunai from Naruto's weapons pouch and pressing it against the unconscious Naruto's throat. "Not everyone gets to experience death twice." Anko tried to think of something, anything, to stop the man when he suddenly dropped Naruto like a hot potato and leapt into the trees. A moment later, 3 Unbu came hurtling into the clearing, one following Orochimaru and the other two stopping. "Anko-sama," the one wearing the bird mask said in surprise. "We've been looking for you all over the place. You should have waited for backup. It was very irresponsible minus." Forcing her way into a sitting position, she glared at the figure speaking while his partner knelt and began healing her. "Right. If you guys weren't so damn slow, a genin wouldn't have had to try and fight that bastard. I'm impressed he managed to live," Bird Mask said, kneeling over him, his own hands glowing blue. "Ho, he's already healing." "Well, yeah," Anko muttered, breathing easier now that Bear Mask had finished working on her lungs and ribs. "I mean, what with him having a healing bloodline and all. Sweet Kami, what kind of idiots are they letting into the UNBU nowadays? He's new, Bear Mask said with a chuckle. Itaki-sama doesn't like him much either, but he is pretty good. More importantly, what exactly happened he minus? Naruto-kun. A new voice shouted as INO came hurtling into the clearing followed by a reluctant-looking male companion. Oh great, it's the princess and the bugger, Anko muttered pushing herself to her feet despite her body's protests. Ho. INO managed, looking around in surprise. Anko-sensei. Wow, what happened to Naruto-kun? I don't have time for this, Anko muttered, while trying desperately to think of a story that could convince both the two genin and the UNBU and keep that evil power she had witnessed secret. Alright. This is the short version. I was on patrol with a couple of idiots, we spotted an S-ranked criminal. I went after him while I sent the idiots to get back up. My little skirmish with the criminal brought us near your camp, and Naruto, who was apparently out hunting, decided to try and help after I got hurt. Well, that was stupid of him, Bird Mask said blandly, finishing up the healing of the blonde. A genin versus an S-ranked criminal is suicide. Sure, Anko agreed, noting the anger flashing in Ino's eyes as she glared at the UNBU. That's why Naruto managed to hold him off while I recovered, right? That's why Orochimaru unleashed such a terrible chakra against a genin and not me, right? She has a point, Bear Mask said, sounding amused. Besides, this is Uzumaki Naruto. I think he could do it with surprise. But, eventually, experience and skill would win out. Which is when you guys arrived, Anko said, glaring at them. I still want to know why it took you an entire day. Because the recruits you sent weren't very clear on your location, Bear Mask explained. We had to comb the whole forest, until we felt the massive chakra being unleashed over here. But Anko-sensei, INO said, sounding slightly worried as she looked at Naruto. What happened to him? Is he okay? Yeah, Anko said, popping her neck and wincing. Reaching up to rub it, she sighed, thankful that she still had enough pain going on in her body to block out the burning of the curse seal. Orochimaru just used a forced sleep seal on him. He should be up and about in a few hours. Sore, drained but alive and able to finish the exam. Actually, he should probably minus, Bird Mask started to say before Anko cut him off. Go back to the camp with his teammates, wake up, and proceed to the tower. This has nothing to do with him, Anko narrowed her eyes, her killing intent flooding his senses. Or do I have to cut your tongue out and feed it to the giant ligers in this place? Right, Bird Mask said weakly, handing INO a pack of medicine. Here, use this, should help him recover. I'm going on patrol. That said, he rushed off into the trees. But, which way is the tower? INO asked, blinking as she and Shino lugged Naruto up. Anko blinked, then glanced at Bear Mask, who coughed and discreetly pointed in the proper direction. Oh yeah, that way. So, you head that way and make sure to look out for the man-eating fly traps, giant centipedes and the poison gas. I'm pretty sure the giant ligers, snow sand arousers, and the bursts of fire are in the other direction. I think so, too, Bear Mask said before tossing the gen in a pouch. Just in case you need some more medical supplies. Or a compass. Thanks. INO managed, blinking. What's a rouse? Rats of unusual size, Bear Mask answered blandly. They're about the size of a medium-sized dog. Then nodding, he glanced at Anko and took off after his partner. The older woman stood there staring at the three and then looked into the forest. When he wakes up, tell him. No. Never mind. That said, she jumped into the trees, knowing that she would speak with Naruto after all of this was over. More important, however, was the silent promise she made to herself. Orochimaru would pay dearly for hurting Naruto. If it cost her life, he would pay. Looks like you had some trouble, Orochimaru-sama. Landing adroitly, or at least as adroitly as a man in Orochimaru's condition could, he grinned, taking his black and red cloak from the young man. Kukuki, there were a few spirited ones, Kabuto-san. You always say that, a new voice said from the shadows of the trees. He isn't going to be happy. We are behind schedule. Sasori-san, it couldn't be helped, Orochimaru said as Kabuto began healing him, glancing at the squat figure that emerged from the trees draped in its own cloak and bamboo hat. Oh, it seems you suffered some serious damage this time, Kabuto said, his voice mildly interested. You need to be more careful, Orochimaru. After all, You are not immortal yet. Not all of us can has as handy a talent as you, Orochimaru said in response, as Kabuto shifted to his cheek, healing it within an instant. But I am touched at your concern, Sasori-san. Ninjutsu is an art, Sasori said blandly, his tail swaying slightly. Art is wonderful in any form, and it must be preserved. You are the perfect choice for that. Yes, of course. Orochimaru said, shifting his attention to the nearly finished medic. Kabuto-san, what do you know about an Uzumaki Naruto? Not much. I has had to rely on what I've overheard, the medic admitted, finishing his treatment before producing a deck of nin cards. Flicking one out, he applied his chakra and frowned slightly. He just became a genin this year, been assigned as an apprentice to Mitarashi Anko, then as a member of Team 10. This is interesting, he's managed to be ranked missions, and won a ranked mission. All completed successfully. Kukuki, I'm not surprised, Orochimaru said, picking up his own bamboo hat from a tree branch. Do you have something I should add? Kabuto asked, raising an eyebrow in curiosity. No, Orochimaru said, a pleasant smile on his face. He's just a genin. Interesting, but nothing worth keeping up on. So, did you make contact before you were distracted? Sasori asked impatiently, eyes darting to the trees from which Orochimaru had just come. We'll has our answer in a month, Orochimaru responded with a delighted chuckle. Right after the Chunin exams. What about the Ichibi Jinchurikai? Kabuto asked, placing his nin cards back into a pouch. He was just as Yura-san said, short-tempered and dangerous. I don't think there are actually many teams left in this exam that he hasn't killed, Orochimaru said, lowering his bamboo hat to shade his eyes. I almost feel sorry for whoever has to capture him. Zetsu-san said that there was a person we should visit in Rock, Sasori said after a protracted pause before setting off at a slow pace. Oh, Kabuto-kun, can you keep an eye on someone for me? Orochimaru said, turning to the younger ninja. Of course, Orochimaru-sama. There's a Uchiha here, you'll know which one. Keep an eye on him, and let me know how he develops, Orochimaru explained before lowering his voice. Keep an eye on Naruto-kun as well. That said, he turned and followed after the impatient-seeming Sasori. What are you hiding? Sasori asked after a moment. Kukuku, what makes you think I'm hiding anything? Because you has a habit of hiding things. So do you, Orochimaru responded lightly. Which is why we work so well together. Don't you agree, Sasori-san? For the moment, Orochimaru-san. I'm so glad we understand each other. Yamanaka INO, for all of her attitude, and the annoyance she felt for Naruto, was worried. According to Anko, Naruto had fought and held off an S-ranked criminal, which was honestly impressive minus, but that he had been hurt. Yet, ever since he had woken up he had rejected any sort of help, instead preferring to soldier on through whatever pain he felt. Why do boys try so hard? INO wondered silently, knowing that if it had been her she would have taken any help she could get. Especially after fighting such an insanely powerful enemy. Naruto-kun, maybe we should take a break. No time, Naruto said firmly, glancing at her. I promise I'm tougher than I look, INO-chan. INO nodded, relenting, and he turned away. Biting her lip to keep quiet, INO watched as one of his hands absently strayed to his stomach. It was one of her moments of uncanny insight that let her to understand his actions. He was acting strong to them. Thinking back to the last time they were on a mission, she realized this was how he always acted when hurt. He had been poisoned hurt. And he had stood up, shoved it all behind a mask of strength. Why? So that they could lean on him, could survive. Oi, Shino, how much further? Naruto suddenly asked, his voice happy and light. I really wanna hurry up and have some Ichiraku ramen. We will arrive shortly, just as soon as we clear these trees, Shino answered without turning, tilting his head slightly. Team 7 appears to be approaching as well. Ho. Naruto blinked, then snorted. We'll get there first. We'll arrive at the same time, Shino explained, finally turning to glance back at them. It appears that this will be a tie. No way I'm tying with that prick, Naruto grumbled. Come on. We can outrun minus. No, INO said firmly, cutting the other blonde off. Noticing his surprise, she fixed him with her most intimidating glare. You are hurt, it doesn't matter if we tie. You staying healthy is more important. Naruto blinked, staring at her for a moment, before he grinned slightly. Aha, but. Come on. We can do it easy. Besides, I told you I was fine. Not hurt at all really. Just stiff. Ino opened her mouth to retort to explain just how hurt he was and would be if he didn't listen to her, only to have him dart off ahead. Speeding up, she followed, joining Shino in the pursuit of their teammate. Naruto for his part, seemed to be having a great old time performing acrobatics and laughing as he went. I can't believe he's doing that, Ino muttered, eyes narrowed in annoyance. He just got done fighting an S-ranked criminal, and now he's jumping around like an insane frog. Maybe it is as he says, Shino said. After all, he does seem to recover more quickly than most people. No, Ino said, shaking her head. He's hiding it, but I know he's hurt. He did the same thing on our last mission. He's hiding whatever's left over from that fight, so we won't get distracted. You may has a point, Shino said seconds before they reached the edge of the trees and the tower came into view. However, it is a pointless concern now. Ino nodded and zeroing in on a now jacketless Naruto darted toward him. The orange-clad idiot looked up, of course a smile plastered on his face. Oi, about time you guys got here. Are you trying to get yourself killed? Ino snapped and huffed, producing the medical pouch that she had been given. Honestly, why do you have to be so stubborn? But I'm Finn minus. If you say that one more time, I'm going to beat you senseless with my sword. Ino shouted. Naruto blinked, then cleared his throat, nodding toward the other group. You do know that Sasuke is hurt, right? And that Sakura-chan is all over him. Ino didn't even glance, focusing instead on him, looking for wounds that he was trying to hide. And I don't care how much you say otherwise, you have to be hurt. Naruto blinked, then stared at her for a moment before reaching up to scratch his head. But Sasuke. Naruto, you're more important, Ino said briskly, not paying attention to what she was saying. Sensing surprise from him, she stopped her search for wounds and looked at him curiously. What was with that look? He looked as if someone had just knocked the air out of him. What? And nothing, Naruto managed weakly and then flushing, which was strange to see minus he coughed. My side sorta hurts. I knew it. Ino shouted, but she couldn't help but wonder why he kept looking at her like she had just offered him free miso ramen for the rest of his life. We should enter the tower now, Shino said, crouching next to them. Team 7 has already entered. Ino grimaced, her fingers leaving the side Naruto had exposed to her. If they failed, it would be her fault. Well, not really, it'd be minus. Oi, let's go, Naruto said, hopping to his feet before helping Ino up. If we fail, then we fail, but at least we got to kick some ass. Having said his piece, he put his hands behind his head and turned heading for one of the doors to the tower, whistling. Ino blinked, surprised at the sudden shift in attitude. For that last few days, Naruto had been frightening in his intensity, yet now he was back to how he was when he had first joined the team. Glancing at Shino, as if seeking his opinion, she was startled to find him looking at her with a raised eyebrow. What? Nothing, Shino said, and then nodding motioned to her to lead the way to the door, where the insane boy was waiting impatiently. Entering the hall together, Team 9 paused and blinked, looking around. It was a massive hall, with 2 railed upper levels running the entire length. Most impressive of all were the 2 massive hands set into what appeared to be a modified ram hand seal, which towered behind the array of sensei and the Hokage himself. Ino wobbled at the knowledge of what she was now seeing. Kami, so many important people. Recovering quickly, she hurried to join Naruto and Shino as they found a place among the other genin present. Looking around nervously, she didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified at seeing just the 12 genin. Shifting her attention away from them, she looked forward once more to stare at the gathered ninja, or more specifically, to stare at the masked jonin, who was causally standing slightly in front of the Hokage with his arms crossed. First off, congratulations on passing. And I'm happy to see that none of you met with the Rousers, the masked ninja finally said. Or the tribe of naked nymphomaniac Kunoichi, he added, his eye curving up in amusement. Ino blinked, then slapped her forehead, while most of the males coughed or made odd noises at that announcement. Ino was at least relieved to see that the Hokage looked less than amused, which was proven when he cleared his throat and the masked man laughed, rubbing the back of his head nervously. Aha, well, anyway, congratulations. The Hokage will now explain the 3rd exam, so listen closely, okay? Stepping aside, the man carefully slipped a red book out of his pocket and began to blush. Ino rolled her eyes and focused instead on the dignified man dressed in white and red. He stared at them in silence, as if appraising them, blowing the occasional smoke ring into the air. Ino began to chew a fingernail, worried that he was going to fail them for being the last to enter or something of the like. Instead he smiled, removing his pipe to speak. I must say, I'm impressed. The 12 of you out of this year's entire exam has made it this far. Normally we has at most 9 examinees remaining, but this year we has so many talented shinobi. Nodding, the old man's smile faded, his tone growing serious. Now, I must explain the true purpose of this exam. Make no mistake, this is a test for those who will become Chunin. But it is also something else. Oi! What the hell are you talking about? Naruto shouted in irritation. Don't interrupt, the Hokage said, fixing the blonde with an intimidating glare before continuing his speech. This exam is a substitute for open war between the shinobi villages. Our nations are tied through peace and non-aggression treaties, and thus we shinobi cannot openly fight like generations past. Therefore, this test evolved. What does that mean? A girl with brown hair done up in buns asked. Each of you from now on will be fighting as representatives of your villages. In 1 month, there will be daimyo and influential businessmen from different nations here to observe this final exam. If the strength of a village is shown, they gain more clients and defeat their enemies by stealing business. If a village is shown to be weak, then they lose. Yeah. Well, why do we have to risk our lives in battle? Kiba shouted angrily. The strength of a country is based on the strength of its hidden village, and the strength of a hidden village is based on its ninja, the Hokage explained seriously. And a shinobi's true strength is born only through life-risking battles. I don't care what it is. Just hurry up and tell us what this life-risking battle entails, a frighteningly plain-looking red-haired boy said. It entails just that, the Hokage said, unimpressed with the child. You will fight with your lives and your country's prestige on the line. Take the month between now and the finals to train, rest, or however you wish to prepare. After that month is up, you will be brought back to the village, and to the stadium for the final exam. So, that's it. Naruto said in amazement. No way. Yes, unless any of you care to ask a question, that's it. Oi, what about these scrolls with our names on them? Kiba asked, holding his up. Ah, yes. Place those in the box being passed around. After that, you're free to go. Ino blinked and began looking frantically for her paper, fearful that she might have lost it. Finding it, she breathed a sigh of relief and dropped it into the box, along with Shino and Naruto. Breathing a sigh of relief at finally having this stage done, she turned to say something to Naruto, only to find him already rubbing his hands together in anticipation. Here, I'm going to get Anko too, so totally minus. She is our sensor, Shino said calmly, walking away from the two. She will train us all equally. Naruto stuck his tongue out at the boy's back, then sighed, putting his hands behind his head. Aha, well. Ichiraku ramen, here I come. Ino shook her head, running her fingers through her formerly lustrous hair. Ugh, it was oily and tangled. She probably stank, too. Correction, she knew she did. After all, it wasn't like she could have risked a bath during the second exam. Right, first thing when she got home was a shower, and then a long warm bubble bath. Oi, Ino. Blinking, Ino came out of her thoughts to see her whiskered teammate staring at her oddly. What? Are you hungry? Naruto asked, smiling at her. Oi, cause I am, and I realized that you hardly ever eat, and this exam really cut back on how much food we had anyway, so if you want you can come with me and get some food. Ino blinked, then chuckled, walking to his side. Sure. But I'm just having a salad. I have to watch my figure, after all. Then, I really gotta wash my hair. You know, don't hit me or anything, Naruto said, glancing at her curiously, but I've been wondering how you ever decided that 3 feet of hair was a good idea. The same way you decided that orange was a good color, Ino retorted, performing a dramatic hair flip. And I'll has you know that guys find long hair very attractive. Oi, but I like short hair, Naruto said, a mischievous grin appearing on his face. And besides, guys also like tits, but I don't see you working on that department yet. Ino froze in surprise, then flushed brightly. I'm going to kill you. Chapter 18. Advanced Training. A lot of things had changed for Naruto since the academy graduation. He'd become stronger. He'd learned what it took to be a ninja and he'd grown close to his new sensei and somewhat closer to his teammates. Hell, not even 24 hours ago, he had finally been told by a girl that he was more important than Sasuke. So yes, much of Naruto's life had changed. And yet, one thing remained the same: Naruto was one of the few shinobi who was actually a deep sleeper. That was how he slept through the alarm, when it had started going off 3 hours earlier than he was used to. Then again, Naruto, with Anko's help, had set his body on a schedule, and 3 hours after his alarm had gone off he woke up, almost instantly. It took him a few minutes to reorient himself, and another minute or so to notice the angle of the dull light coming through his window. He scowled, rolled over, looking at his clock in annoyance, before getting up. Selecting the kunai he kept on hand, he threw them at the familiar targets in his room, still missing all of them. As part of his routine, he padded into the bathroom to his shower and to briefly studied the konoha scar on his forearm. Finished, he dressed in his kami-blessed orange and sought out breakfast. 2. 4 servings of ramen and milk later, he was walking out of his apartment and heading into the nearly empty streets. He had planned on getting some training in before the meeting Anko had ordered him to. Judging by the sky and the people around him, he might still be able to do that. It would have to be something simple. Maybe just a little sparring with cave bunshine while water walking. The best place for that was the hot springs a block over. Setting off at a trot, he idly thought about eating with INO yesterday. By the time they had made it back to Konoha, it had been evening. Dinner had been unusual to say the least. It had been so strange to have someone his own age, let alone a girl, sitting next to him. It had made him self-conscious too. It was probably the first time he had made sure to keep from spilling anything on himself. The strangest part, however, had been the way I and that old man had smiled at them. Shaking it off, while deciding that old people were just weird, he focused instead on sneaking into the hot springs. He had not so long ago, when he had been creating his sexy no jutsu, been caught and banned. So if he was caught, well, he didn't want to think about it. A few quick tricks of the trade to distract, and he slipped past the hired guard. Grinning, Naruto prepared for his sparring session when, well, teenage instincts kicked in. He was 13, after all, and it was pointless to deny that Naruto, like most teenagers, was more than slightly interested in the opposite sex. Now, of course, he would deny that outside of what he had seen between couples on the streets, he wasn't entirely sure what to do with a girl. But he was interested. Applying his now beloved camouflage technique, he slinked through the brightening bathhouse area, intent on the sounds of women talking and more than a few splashes. Almost as if he were drawn to it, he approached the side of the building, where he remembered the peephole being. A moment later, he was peeking at the very interesting sight of naked women. It was probably the first time he had ever felt actual appreciation for the female form. Still, it wasn't long before guilt set in, and with 1 or 2 last peeks he moved away from the peephole and began his training. A few minutes later, he was absorbed in his sparring session, or as close to it as possible. He was distracted by rather perverted sounds coming from behind him, but he only had a few minutes to spare. Still, it was getting annoying as hell. Turning in frustration, he marched back to dry land, ready to demand the pervert stop, when he blinked, seeing a white-haired old man dressed in the most outlandish costume he had ever seen. That was beyond perverted, or even a prank. That was a crime and wrong. Oi! What the hell are you doing? Be quiet. The man said without turning. I let you has your chance to look. This is for my art. What the hell? You're just some perverted old man. Naruto shouted, pointing a finger in accusation. If you were my age, it'd be one thing, but you're old. Peeking's a crime. It's how I get inspiration. The old man said, turning completely as he flashed his hands through a series of seals before, slamming them into the ground an instant before a giant toad appeared from nowhere. Now, stay out of my way, punk. Naruto blinked in surprise as he was lifted off his feet as the toad's tongue slammed into his chest, and sent him crashing into the hot water behind him. Sputtering and struggling his way back to the surface, Naruto found himself glaring up at the amused face of the white-haired pervert. Apparently satisfied, the man banished the toad and turned, heading for the wall and the peephole. Now, if Uzumaki Naruto was one thing besides the next Hokage, it was clever and a master prankster. A moment later he had created a cave bunshine, transformed it with the sexy no jutsu, then had it bump into the side of the bathhouse and shriek the words "E. Pervert." This of course drew a ton of attention, and the doors in neighboring bathhouses slammed open. The old man of course panicked and turned as if to flee the scene of the crime, when Naruto caught him with one of his patented prank jutsu, a kaikutsu no jutsu, which basically applied a third-person komai to the old man's sandals, exchanging them with a pair of red heels 2 sizes too small. This in turn threw Freya off balance and Naruto, with a grin and quick, sexy no jutsu, Anko variation, departed unaccosted. After all, who in their right mind would try to talk to Anko? Chuckling at his ingenuity over beating that idiot, though the giant toad was a neat trick, he allowed his Anko appearance to crumble so that he was once more Naruto. Thankfully, the streets were still pretty empty and nobody really paid much attention to him, which was a good thing in his opinion. After all, the sexy no Javutsu variation was not something he wanted to be public knowledge. It was bad enough that Anko had learned the sexy no jutsu, but she had helped him develop the sexy no jutsu variation technique, so that was okay. Still, the fewer people who knew about it, the better. He almost shivered to think of what someone like Kiba would do with the ability. Putting aside his thoughts on the technique, he slipped into the semi-dark building of Leaf Central and felt a shiver race up his back. This place felt haunted so early in the morning, but still a note from Anko was not something he could ignore. Especially on his first day of active training for that final exam, though he did wonder why INO and Shino weren't here waiting. Walking past the empty desks and rooms, he gulped, unurged slightly, and then entered the stairwell that he knew would take him to the Hokage's office. He tried once more to think about what she could want, especially if it involved the Hokage. The last time he had been in a meeting with them had been told about his bloodline. What would it be this time? Well, he would find out soon enough, he supposed. The hallway seemed to take forever, mostly because he swore he felt like there were a dozen eyes watching him. Still, he kept the uneasy feeling from showing up and instead, boisterously talked about becoming Hokage. Who knew, maybe the old man was stepping down already for him. However, when he said that out loud, he heard something that sounded suspiciously like a snicker. Glaring at nothing in particular, he opened the door to the Hokage's office with a loud bang, finding not only the Hokage and Anko, but also Kakashi. "Oi, do you want to see me, psycho?" Anko grinned slightly at the name. "I left you a note, didn't I, you little prick?" Closing the door with a loud thump, the orange-clad ninja tossed a more civil good morning to an amused-looking Hokage and a suspicious-looking Kakashi. Shifting his attention back to the woman, he stretched, popping his back. "So, I has a mission," Anko said with a slight scowl. "I won't be able to train you. But, I wanted you to train me," Naruto said. "Plus Ino-chan and Shino need your help too." "I know," Anko said in annoyance. "Kakashi here agreed to take them on while I was gone minus that masked pervert," Naruto shouted, pointing at the man in question. He couldn't believe how this day was going. First that pervert that had ruined his early morning training, and now this. Naruto, it was the only way to keep my book. Well, it was either this or go on another date with Anko. Coward chose the easy way, Anko remarked flippantly before shaking her head. "Anyway, the reason I'm telling you all of this is because I asked an old friend a huge favor." "Ho. See, I couldn't let just any idiot teach you," Anko explained, grinning faintly at Kakashi's snort of annoyance. "So, I asked Freya-sama to tutor you while I was on my mission." "Freya?" Naruto repeated blankly, the name not clicking for a moment, then suddenly he went rigid. "The guy that taught the Yondem?" "Yeah," Anko said with some amusement. "He owes me, and besides, he's the only one I trust to not ruin everything we've worked on." "Whoa!" Naruto shouted, glomping Anko, before doing a silly little dance, unable to believe that he would be getting the Yondem's teacher. This would mean that between Anko and Freya, he could be Hokage by next week. Oh yeah, he was so going to kick Sasuke's and everyone's asses. "Sorry I'm late," a new, though familiar, voice said. "I ran into this little prick and he." Naruto froze and turned, finding himself staring at the old man from the hot springs. Both stared and then simultaneously pointed at each other, voices echoing in unison. "Pervert." Both blinked, stared at each other, then rounded on the others in the room. "What the hell is he doing here?" they shouted in unison. Anko raised an eyebrow, a smirk on her face. "Naruto, meet Freya-sama." "Freya-sama, meet Naruto. He's all yours for a month." "You bitch." Both shouted once more, before fleeing the room amid a hail of sharp, pointy objects from Anko. "Oi, so why'd we come all the way out here?" Naruto asked, glaring at the large, outlandish man. You want to spar or something? Now, Freya said, waving a hand dismissively. Knowing Anko, I has a pretty good idea what you're capable of. Seeing the boy's inquisitive look, Freya sighed. I'm a Sanin, your runt, there's no need to me to bat you around. Hey. Oh. Just be quiet, Freya snapped, glaring at him. Just be happy I don't summon a toad to squish you for ruining my research. You were peeking. So were you, Freya countered before waving a hand in dismissal. Anyway, we came out here to work in peace. Plus, there's a waterfall nearby, so. Yeah, we'll be minus. Do you treat all of your students this way? Naruto asked angrily. First off, Freya said, bashing him on top of the head, before striking an impressive pose. Don't interrupt me when I'm speaking. I'm Mount Myaboku Gama's Holy Master Sennin. Also known as the Toad Sennin. Remember it. Whatever, Iro Sennin, Naruto muttered, rubbing his head. Letting that name slide, the Yondem had called him almost the same thing minus the massive man crossed his arms, turning serious. Second off, you're not my student, you're Anko's. I'm not about to take someone else's student. Think of me as a highly overqualified substitute teacher. Then what are you going to teach me? Freya paused, rubbing his chin in thought. To be honest, it had been years since he had taught anybody, but he knew what Anko had told him, so he had a rough idea of what to teach. Still, there were other things to cover and explain before he taught the boy anything. Namely, of course, what the Sandame and that Kakashi were trying to keep hidden. Oi, Iro Sennin. Hold your horses, punk, the Sanin said, sitting on an overturned log and motioning for the blonde to sit down across from him. Look. This is more difficult than just teaching, okay? I has a lot of important things I have to pass along. But for me to do that, you'll has to show some patience, okay? Okay, Naruto said, finally turning serious. We'll start with the basics, Freya said with a slight nod. How many cave bunshine can you make at one time? I made 1,000 one time, Naruto admitted while rubbing his chin. Normally, Joe, if I really try, I can make 50 or 100. I see, Freya said, rubbing his own chin in thought, slightly impressed with the number. You know, Harate said something about how cave bunshine can give me knowledge. Yeah, Freya said with a smirk. Cave bunshine was originally developed as a spying move, but it can be used to speed up certain things, which is how the Yondem got so strong so quickly. But not everyone can do it. The chakra requirements are outrageous, and the mental strain is unfathomable. Whoa. Yeah, so we'll keep it safe and go for 100. You shouldn't snap under that strain. Oi, will that be enough? Will 100 clones every day for 30 days be enough? Freya repeated, almost hollowly. It's the equivalent of working with 3,000 clones, which is roughly equal to at least a year of solid training on the same techniques. The same techniques. Naruto blinked. I thought you'd teach me all sorts of new stuff. I'll teach you a few useful tricks, Freya admitted. I promise that by the end of the month, you'll have everything I teach you as pure instinct, but I wouldn't recommend trying this training trick for another 6 months. You'll have to give your mind time to recover. Well, what are we waiting for? Naruto said, jumping to his feet halfway through the seal for the clones. Freya, in response to this, casually beamed the blonde with a rock between the eyes, knocking him on his ass. I thought I told you to be patient, Freya grumbled in annoyance. If it hadn't been for Satobi and Anko, they couldn't have paid him to handle this runt. We're not even where I want us to train. I haven't explained how the cave bunshine training will work. Or anything else I want to say before we even begin training. Well, I don't have time to that. I gotta get stronger. If I don't, then I'll never be Hoko minus. Freya beamed him with another rock, scowling slightly. First off, runt, it'll be a couple of years before you're anywhere near ready for that job. Second off, patience is a virtue for a ninja. Without it, you'll never get anywhere. Third off, why the hell do you want to be Hokage? Oi, because it's my dream. Okay, Freya said with a snort. Why is it your dream? Because to be Hokage is to be the strongest ninja in the village. I'm still not following. It just is. If I'm Hokage, I can do things like help the orphans being abused and whatever. You could do that now. I'm going to be Hokage. Naruto said fiercely. Freya groaned. Oh, Kami, help him. Look, let's not get into this right now, okay? We has other things to talk about. Seeing the blonde's disgruntled glare, he rolled his eyes. Listen, runt. You can either has a temper tantrum, or you can listen to me and learn a few things. Like what? Wind jutsu seals how to move extremely fast. Freya said, then, noticing the look on the boy's face, braced himself for the coming storm. First things first, though, what do you know about your family? Not a lot, Naruto whispered, looking down slightly. I'm an orphan, you know. I just know they're not around and nobody knows anything about them. That's not quite true, Freya said carefully, scratching his cheek. Actually, I suppose I should tell you I'm partly the reason you don't know anything about them. Then again, the other part of it is because of the Yondan and his decision to completely destroy his name. Ho! Naruto managed, anger smoldering in his eyes. But he was holding his tongue. That was a surprising, but good sign. Well, don't you think it's strange that the Yondan is never referred to by his real name? I mean, even the Sandame is still called Satriobi by some people. Freya shrugged, holding a finger up. You see, the Yondan came from a very abusive and altogether unpleasant family, and he didn't want anything to do with them. He ran away from home at an early age and, long story short, he eventually ended up as an orphan in Konoha, but he never answered to a name. How the hell does that affect me? Naruto demanded, the anger in his voice and those eyes growing. I'm getting there, Freya said, thankful that Naruto was giving him a chance to explain. So eventually, he ended up on my team of genin and then through years of hard work and sacrifice, finally gained a name beyond them. He was about 20 when that happened. Anyway, shortly after this, Azumaki Kasuno Kunoichi from another village that he had met earlier turned up in Konoha pregnant with his son. Me? Naruto asked faintly, surprise etched on his face. You? Freya confirmed, surprised at how calm the boy seemed. Shrugging it off, he continued the story, pleased to see the boy's rapt attention. They hid her pregnancy, the fear of you life. She was from a Forgian village, after all. Albeit, a Fourian village that had been wiped off the face of the planet by K's no Kuni and a Sisut weapon. A Sisut weapon? Yes. Now, to make another long story short, she died giving birth the same day that the Kyuubi attacked Konoha. Then the Yondan, Naruto managed weakly, before glaring at Freya. So, why didn't anyone ever tell me? Well, now, that's where I come in, Freya said, scratching his head. See, the Yondan was ashamed of his family and he loved your mother. So after I came back I was off trying to keep tabs on Orochimaru at the time, minus I did what I felt was right by him. What does that mean? Naruto growled. I destroyed all the records related to you, except for your family name. Freya said with a shrug. Your mum and dad told me they wanted to use her name partly because he wanted his birth family to get nothing from his legacy, partly because she was the last Azumaki and they were a good clan that deserved a chance at survival. But mostly because he wanted you to have a childhood free from the overwhelming expectations and pressures of being his son. He wanted you to grow and develop as your own person. Naruto blinked, then scowled. He did not look happy, he looked downright murderous, actually. Freya felt guilty. He had after all stolen Naruto's family from him. But he had related the story, certain details omitted for the moment minus, and he accepted whatever blame Naruto felt like throwing at him. So, what was his name? Naruto finally asked, his tone still holding a note of anger. I can't keep referring to him as the Yondan in my head. Namikaze Minato, Freya said, shaking his head. Or, at least, that's what he told me once. I just started calling him Arashi cause he hated his name. Can we start training now? Naruto asked, his emotions that had been so apparent before now shoved behind a mask. That was surprising to see. A genin masking such strong emotions. It was impressive and slightly worrying, it hinted at an unstable personality. Still, it wasn't his business since he wasn't Naruto's real sensei, but he would talk with Anko about it. Nodding, Freya climbed to his feet. Tomorrow. Today we'll go over how the cave bunshine training will work while we walk to the training area I has in mind. Right. Naruto said, hopping to his feet to fall into step with him. Of course after we talk about all that there will be girls at this waterfall, Freya said, rubbing his hands together while grinning lecherously, absently noting a flash of interest in Naruto's face. Pervert. Naruto muttered. No, Freya said with a small shake of his head. You're a pervert. I'm a super pervert. Day 1. Wham. Ow www. Naruto yelped, jerking at the sharp and painful contact with his ribs. Sitting upright, he turned his dark glare on the attacker who stood over him. Up and at 'em, bastard, Freya said, glaring at him. Only prostitutes get to train on their backs. Grumbling, Naruto watched the Sannin return to the fire and sighed, flopping back onto his sleeping mat. As if his sleep hadn't been disturbed enough, his normal dreams usually involving ramen minus had been replaced by dreams of his dad and blood. Needless to say, Naruto had tossed and turned all night and was now quite grumpy. Are you getting up, or do I need to shove a kunai up your ass? I'm up. Naruto grumbled, finally getting out of bed and stumbling over to the man who was causally leaning against a tree with his arms crossed. Freya, the legendary teacher of the Yondim, the biggest pervert Naruto had ever met. This was also the man responsible for Naruto growing up without knowing his family, and a very large part of Naruto resented him. Still, the old man had admitted his role in the affair and had told him about his family. That helped keep Naruto from attacking, as did the symbol that Anko had carved into his arm. He wouldn't let them win, though who them were he didn't know, and Freya was a way of winning. As to how Naruto felt about being related to the Yondim, he felt pride, anger, sadness, loathing, all rolled up into one tight ball that was settled in the bottom of his stomach. He just couldn't decide how he should feel about the Hokage. All of the feelings he had harbored toward an unnamed family were now directed at Minato. Well, let's get started, the white-haired man said, interrupting his thoughts. Knock out those 100 clones and let's get this show on the road. Yeah, Naruto muttered and, closing his eyes, formed the familiar seal. His chakra was sluggish like it had been yesterday. He could feel the pressure building in his temples, and then it was gone. Opening his eyes, he looked around and then back at the man who snorted. Can't count. That's only 50, where's the rest? Oi, it's harder than I remember. Naruto snapped and then repeated the process, producing the missing numbers. Satisfied, he crossed his arms and glared at the man. There. Freya frowned and created his 4 clones, and then popped his neck, addressing the Narutos. Alright, so this is how it works. You'll divide into 4 groups, 25 to a group. Then, you'll follow these dashing men. At this, the Sannin gestured at his clones. After that you practice whatever they teach you. So, get. A few minutes later, the 2 originals were left alone in the clearing, and Naruto was grumbling about having to prepare the fire. Oi! Why do I have to do this? Because I'm teaching you, Freya said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Well, what the hell are we going to be working on? Nothing for now, Freya said, sitting down across from the boy as the fire finally came to life. We'll just talk for a bit about seals, along with internal and external chakra. But why can't minus? Because cave bunshine training is never to be used to learn sealing, or internal and external chakra, Freya said with a frown. Seals are a way of altering reality, they break the rules of the universe. Mislearning anything involving them can have very nasty results. Oi, but why shouldn't the cave bunshine be used? I mean, wouldn't it speed things up? I could learn more about seals faster. It's because of how the information comes to you through the cave bunshine, Freya explained, preparing breakfast. Let's say there's 5 steps to a seal, so you create say 3 clones. Now then, all 3 learn what you need to know and then pop out of existence. You have their knowledge, their experience, true, but it'll be jumbled and you won't be able to make heads nor tails out of it. Oh, Naruto said with a slight scowl, getting the point. He could just picture getting a seal that could alter reality wrong. Hell, fouling up a jutsu that you knew how to do was painful enough. That was just asking for trouble. Okay, so what's internal and external chakra? Good question, Freya said, shifting slightly in his seat. Chakra, you do know what chakra is, right? Of course I do. Naruto said indignantly. He did know, just not the exact details. It's what we use in jutsu and stuff. Chakra, Freya sighed, is the combination of physical energy and spiritual energy. Oh. Yeah. Freya rubbed the bridge of his nose. Now, chakra can be divided by me at least, since I'm the only one who ever noticed into either internal chakra or external chakra. Care to guess why I call them that? Oh. Cause one is external and one is internal. Naruto managed, scratching the back of his head, not really understanding what all of this meant. Right. One affects things outside of the body, and the other affects things inside the body. One example of external chakra is ninjutsu, and another is water walking. Genbutsu, on the other hand, uses internal chakra, and of course another example of internal chakra is channeling it into your legs for a boost in speed or strength. I see, Naruto said, nodding slightly. He actually did get the concept. Somehow, though, he got the feeling that the whole explanation was being dumbed down. Still, at least he understood what he was being told. Still didn't mean he understood why they were talking about this stuff. Now the only reason I really bring internal and external chakra up is because of seals, Freya said, as if reading Naruto's mind. Seals actually convert internal and external chakra, depending on the purpose of the seal. This is called chakra conversion ability because of the ability of turning internal into external and external into internal. Ho! Naruto blinked, losing all understanding. What the hell are you saying? Idiot! Freya muttered, and then, rubbing his chin, sighed. I suppose the best explanation would be this: you breathe air, right? So, the air would be called external, you're breathing it would be conversion, and once it's inside you it becomes internal. Oh. Yeah. Freya nodded in annoyance. Now, then, if you breathe the air out. Well, of course the entire process works in reverse. Do you get it? Naruto blinked, then rubbed his chin thoughtfully. He thought he got it, or at least the gist of it all. Which was the important thing in his opinion. Still he pondered it for a few more minutes, then lifted a finger proclaiming his answer proudly. Nope. What? Well, I don't really get it, Naruto said with a shrug. Oi, but I get the general idea. This is going to be a long month, Freya said, slapping his forehead. Meanwhile, in the Unbu training area, Kakashi sighed, crouching down on the branch as he watched INO go through a few basic warm UPS. Mentally, however, he wondered if she was truly suited for the life of a ninja. Sighing, he shook his head and started speaking. The one problem I've noticed all Kenbutsu users have is that they lose the element of surprise. I sorta get that, INO admitted as she looked up at him warily. I mean, with my sword strapped to my back it's sorta obvious what I'll be attacking with, right? Exactly, Kakashi said cheerfully, his eye curving up happily. So, since I'm not that good with a sword, I'll be helping you hone your senses. That way, even without an element of surprise, you can be ready for anything. Okay, INO said slowly, her thumb rubbing the handle of the ninja 2 she was holding. So, how exactly are you going to minus? A minute later she was desperately trying to deflect the pebbles Kakashi was hurling at her. A moment later the masked ninja finished, and shook his head. The girl's senses were subpar, even for an average ninja. Still, she wasn't completely horrible, so maybe there was some hope for her. What the hell were you doing? INO screeched up at him indignantly, her skin dotted with red marks. Training you, Kakashi admitted as he pulled a small red book from his chest's pocket. But if you don't want to, just go home. Just throw the damn rocks. INO shouted, clutching her ninja 2 tightly in front of her. Seconds later she was swinging the blade wildly. A moment later she twisted too far, overextended, and Kakashi took advantage, bouncing a rock off her ass. Then when she turned back, he bounced one off her shoulder and another on her hand, making her drop the blade. Don't rely on your eyes, INO-chan, Kakashi said brightly, despite his disappointment at her dismal display. Then, how the hell am I supposed to stop the rocks? INO snapped, glaring at him as she retrieved her weapon angrily. Here, Kakashi said, tossing a kunai with a strip of cloth wrapped around it at her feet. Put that on and then reach out with your sixth sense, the one all ninja has, and use it to guide your weapon. INO grumbled, bending over to retrieve the cloth, then jerked forward with a yelp as another rock bounced off her butt. You bastard. You know, maybe you should just give this up. We has a whole month before the final exam. I could probably teach you a few basic ninjutsu. Or maybe you could just go home. Kakashi said, bouncing the rocks in his hand absently while reading his book. He waited another minute, then looked at her calculatingly. Of course, I don't think Naruto or Sasuke would notice you if you just gave up. What? INO shouted, a dangerous aura beginning to radiate off her. Kakashi just offered his single-eye smile in return, which prompted INO to angrily tie the cloth around her eyes and hold her ninja 2 out in front of her in a vice grip. Bring it, you masked freak. Remember, don't just swing, try to stretch out with your senses, Kakashi said, hurling a pebble at her while she began to swing wildly. Stir-kick her shoulder, he sighed. Don't react until you feel the attack, otherwise you leave yourself wide open. INO cursed, much to Kakashi's amusement, but readied herself. Kakashi paused, leaving her to the tension that would be coursing through her with each passing minute. Her blade moved a fraction of an inch at the sound of a rustling leaf, but Kakashi waited. Minutes stretched out before him, and then finally, he threw a pebble, aiming for her forehead protector. INO, muscles taut, moved the ninja to striking the rock with a ring. The rock shot through the air and embedded itself in a nearby tree. INO ripped her blindfold off and started cheering, waving her sword around crazily. Kakashi raised an eyebrow, reconsidering what Harate had told them before he had died. Maybe she was a Kenbutsu providee. Well, that's not bad, INO-chan, Kakashi said happily, bouncing a few more pebbles as she looked up at him. So, shall we continue? Yes. INO said, glaring at him before putting the blindfold back on. Feeling the chill race up his spine from the killing intent she was radiating, he chuckled. It was nice to see she was getting serious about this training, but she really didn't need to use killer intent during a lesson. Shaking his head, he began pelting her with pebbles, marking it off to being exposed to Anko. Day 5. Remember, the secret of sealing is the simplicity of it, Freya said, holding a finger up, temples throbbing from the migraine he was developing. Beginners tend to spell out exactly what they want a seal to do, which detracts from the simplicity. This also requires more internal chakra, which can prove very dangerous. Then, how would you do this? Naruto snapped, irritably looking up from the complex squiggly marks in the dirt he had been writing for the last 2 hours. It's not about how I would do it, Freya explained in annoyance, poking at the early morning campfire. It's your seal, your chakra, so it's up to you to figure out how to get what you want from the seal. Hearing the prick grumble even as his stick returned to etching the practice seal in the dirt, the Sannin shook his head. They were 5 days into the training, and, while the cave bunshine trick was working, Freya was almost frightened at how fast Naruto was progressing on that front. Minor sealing was another matter. The entire reason Freya had included it was because of Gaara, and of course, because it taught patience, something Naruto sorely lacked. Yet, while most ninja never advanced very far in the art of sealing, they understood that you had to keep things simple. Naruto, however, kept overcomplicating his seals. Often to the point that, if they were to be activated, the blonde would use up all his chakra, and Freya just wasn't sure what the hell to do about it. He couldn't stop teaching it after all. A little knowledge was a dangerous thing, but Naruto needed to know the basics for the Gogyo seal he was planning on imparting just in case Gaara went berserk. Ugh. Naruto suddenly said, angrily jabbing his stick into the seal he had been working on. Maybe it's time for a break, Freya said, his mind wandering to the girls who would soon be arriving at the waterfall. He couldn't help but grin, blushing slightly as he pictured those nubile bodies glistening in the sunlight from the oh-so-cold water. Oi, are you daydreaming about peeping again? Naruto said in clear irritation. Jerking out of his thoughts, Freya frowned in annoyance. You has no sense of beauty. The female form is beautiful, and it must be observed. It's why I started my book, to share such special knowledge with the masses. It's just a naughty book. Naruto said in dismissal. You've never had a girlfriend, has you? Freya said in annoyance, not meaning to actually insult the blonde. Just be quiet. Naruto snapped angrily, grabbing a stick and sketching another beginner seal in the dirt once more. Freya paused, then looked over that boy. Kami, he should have known better than to say that, but it did make him worry about something else. At least tell me you've had a crush on a girl. Yeah, I have, Naruto admitted, pausing in his seal practice. Thank the Kami, Freya managed. He had been worried for a second that the blonde had been cheated of even that experience. If so, the Sannin would have never been able to forgive himself for it. So, what was her name? None of your business, Naruto snapped, not looking up. You know, Anko was telling me a bit about that girl on your team. What's her name? Freya said, feigning faulty memory as he fished her information. Blonde hair. Blue eyes. Oi, INO-chan. Naruto blinked, looking up in surprise. Yeah, I think that was her name. So, what's she like? Freya asked, blinking, as the blonde got a thoughtful look. Then, he listened as Naruto spent the next half hour or so talking about what INO was like. How she could be really bitchy at times and then sorta okay other times. About how she had this insane fixation on orange being a bad color and that she dieted all the time. How badly she had been affected after her first kill and so weird in the forest of death after that. About how she had been the first girl to tell him he was more important than Sasuke and to eat dinner with him. When he finished, Naruto stared at the older man curiously, scratching his nose. Oi, so what's up with her? Freya hid his grin, knowing the beginnings of a crush when he heard one. Nothing, she's a female, and they're insane. But now, back to that seal. Grumbling, Naruto returned his attention to the ground. Oh yeah, Freya thought in amusement as Naruto finally began to get the sealing process. He's got it bad. Shino darted left, mirrored by his Kaikeichu Bunshine, then skidding to a halt, both launched themselves forward at their common enemy. The masked ninja neatly caught the Bunshine and twisted, hurling into Shino, who in a spray of bugs, fell to the ground. Rolling at his feet, the Abaim held his hands out, willing his bugs to form a mushy cape. A moment later, as Kakashi rebounded from his failed attack, Shino shifted the wall of his Kaikai into a half-dozen Kaikeichuris, and sent them crashing, after the man. Kakashi of course nimbly dodged each one, then, with a rapid movement Shino was unable to follow, nailed him with a punch. Rolling with the blow, Shino came to his feet, ready to continue when Kakashi held a hand up to signal a stop. You're not bad, Kakashi said after a moment. I curved up happily. Much better than INO, and I think in terms of technique you might even surpass most Uchiha. Thank you. But you'll still never be able to beat me or much of anyone else in anything other than a sparring match. Kakashi said seriously. I fail to see how you can determine that. Shino said, feeling a slight stab of annoyance. After all, he had just proven how good he was in the match against Kakashi. So true, he might not be at the same level yet, he would be there someday. Because you're always thinking, you never react. You predict, then act. Kakashi sighed, shaking his head. All logic, no emotion or instinct. Emotions cloud judgment, Shino countered, repeating what his father had told him repeatedly. It was true too. All he had to do was look at INO. Her decisions were always clouded by her emotions. True, if you rely on only them. But you have to realize that even the weakest of people, if motivated by certain emotions, can overcome insanely powerful enemies. Maybe. For you. But I'd prefer to keep an even mind. Shino said, shaking his head slightly and turning away. He had to work on his Tekkeiyu, it was still taking too long, his family was still a tad sluggish. INO would kick your ass, Kakashi said blandly, and when Shino stopped, the masked man shrugged. Simple matter is, she might not as crisp technique like you, but she has imagination and her desires are driving her. That is an interesting opinion, Shino allowed, struggling to keep from snorting at the idiocy of that statement. He could defeat INO any day of the week, though she was his teammate, and he respected her. A good ninja needs to know how to improvise, to let their emotions out, to help them. How to use their instincts properly, not to look at everything with nothing but logic. Kakashi said, pulling his red book out and turning away. However, you do has potential. Emotions are not an aid to a ninja, Shino said, his kaikai beginning to stream from the sleeves of his jacket. Oh, that's anger you feeling. Kakashi said, turning to glance at Shino over his shoulder. You feel it, right? How it's trying to drive you. A ninja needs that. Shino hesitated, reining himself back in. It appeared that Kakashi might indeed has a point, but he would need to consider the matter more thoroughly. Then realizing that the silver-haired man had disappeared as he was apt to doing, Shino selected a tree and approached. There was no time like the present, it appeared, and Shino had to decide who was correct, his father or the Unbu commander. Day 10. Listen carefully. Brat. This Gogyo Fuin is a very special seal. This is a seal that can totally disrupt a person's chakra and knock the enemy unconscious. However, to use it, your chakra has to be larger than your target's at the moment of application. Ho! Naruto managed, his temples throbbing as he tried to understand what the perverted old man was explaining. It was almost like trying to hold water in his hands, it was all so damn complicated. Of course, the mental fatigue from the constant cave bunshine training wasn't helping much either. Think about it like this, Freya explained, selecting a rock before gesturing at a tree branch. This rock is the Gogyo Fuin. That branch there is your target. Right. Now then, when I throw this rock, that's me applying chakra, Freya said, almost casually tossing the rock at the branch. There was a sharp crack and then, suddenly, the branch was split in two. That, of course, is the end result. I severed the connection. Naruto blinked, then nodded, grasping what the man meant. Oi, so how do you do this Gogyo Fuin? There are two ways, Freya explained as he stretched. The first is the proper way, which requires two hands to use. When this version is applied, it is so painful that it not only severes your chakra, but knocks you unconscious for at least a couple of days. Oi, what about the other one? It's a slightly weaker, very crude variation. Basically, it requires a single hand to prepare, which is a useful ability if you only has one hand available. It's not as painful as the proper version, and it only disrupts your chakra, but it's still effective. Can you show me that one? Naruto asked, eyes wide at finally learning something useful from this seal training. Well, knowing how to seal fire might be useful, but he wasn't sure how. This sounded a lot more up his alley. You have to become extremely proficient with seals to perform the single-handed one, Freya said with a smirk. Now the two-handed version, well, you might be able to manage it by the end of the month. Really? Naruto said excitedly, almost rubbing his hands together. So, I need to create a couple cave bunshine and... No, Freya interrupted, shaking his head. You won't be able to apply it at all, you'll just have to learn if you can do it or not in a fight. But why? Well, it's obvious, Freya said in exasperation. The Gogyo Fuin, the proper version that I'm going to teach you, would dispel the cave bunshine, and that pain would slam into your head like a ton of bricks. But that doesn't happen when the others get dispelled. No. But then again, they're not experiencing pain on a level that could turn your insides into jello, Freya said flatly. You'd feel it. Weakened of course, but you would feel it, and trust me, it's not pleasant. Fine, Naruto grumbled in annoyance, accepting that for the moment. After all, if he pissed the man off too much, he'd cut out early and go peeking. Hell, as it was, they only had another hour before Freya did just that. Oi, so are you going to explain this Gogyo Fuin or what? Keep your shirt on, Freya said in annoyance as he demonstrated the finger seals. The seals are simple enough, plus you just concentrate the chakra into the tips of your fingers. After that, it's just a matter of where you apply it. Some places are better than others. Ho! Naruto managed, trying to memorize the finger movements that Freya was showing him. You know, where you apply the seal. There's really only 3 ideal targets for the Gogyo Fuin, the lower, middle and upper hara. Hara. Naruto blinked, scratching the back of his head, a feeling that Oka had mentioned it once rattling around in his mind. A point on the body where your chakra is most concentrated, Freya explained tiredly. The ideal place to apply the Gogyo Fuin would be on the lower hara, which is located at the stomach. I knew that. Naruto said defensively, before scratching the back of his head. So, why there? Sure you did, the save said before shaking his head. As the why the lower hara, it's safer and easier to access. The middle hara is the solar plexus, and applying the Gogyo Fuin there could cause suffocation, while the upper hara, which is the forehead, will cause the brain to die. Oh, Naruto said with a slight scowl. Yeah, so unless you has no other option, go to the stomach, Freya said, lifting a finger. Using this seal is not to be taken lightly. Day 15. Oi, do I have to use leaves? Naruto asked suddenly, looking up from the latest seal that he was practicing. Seeing Freya's startled look, Naruto explained. I mean with the Shunshin no Jutsu. I've been thinking about it, and it seems like it's sorta pointless to just use leaves or other things. You want to modify the Shunshin no Jutsu? Freya repeated blankly. Actually, that's pretty easy. You just substitute one element for another. Every village already does it, so it's not impossible. You should know that. Oh, Naruto said, scowling in thought. So, what element did you have in mind? Well, Naruto said slowly, finishing his latest seal, feeling a moment of pride at finally progressing. I mean, you've told me how people tend to use leaves, or mist or water or something. So, why not wind? Actually, it's not a bad idea. The trick would be to combine a powerful enough wind to cover the Shunshin, especially if you use it against the Hyuga or an Uchiha. Virier said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Creative too. So, it can be done. Yeah, Freya nodded. Just have to practice and figure out how to do it. It's definitely something to ponder. We'll get some clones on it tomorrow. Great, Naruto said, turning back to his seal before blinking. Oi, so like I was saying, Anko freaked when I handed her Kakashi's book. So that's why he twitched when I tried to borrow it to double-check something? Freya asked, chuckling. Day 20. Freya was using what was left of the dying light to make a few final sketches to his latest book. It was slow going. Inspiration was not very common out here, especially since the girls had mysteriously stopped showing up. Not that his blonde companion cared, all that Naruto worried about was eating and training. That boy had to be the single more boring person ever. Oh sure, Naruto was talented when it came to fighting, but boring as hell otherwise. Sighing, the Sanin focused on his latest line, humming to himself as he kept his hand steady, knowing a mistake here would force him to start the book over. I got dinner. Naruto suddenly shouted from behind him. Freya jerked, sending his book flying and his pen sailing. Battle-tested eyes followed the fluttering descent of his precious novel until it came to rest a few inches from the simmering fire. Scrambling forward, the toad save grasped his book, desperately flicking through the pages, looking for a stray mark. All the while, Naruto causally began to skin the fish and prepare dinner. Oi oi, so I've been wondering about Minus. You idiot! Freya shouted, leaping to his feet and bashing the boy with his free hand. Do you has any idea how close you came to ruining my novel? Hey! Naruto shouted back, while rubbing his head. It's just some damn perverted book. You. Freya fumed and then, glaring angrily, stalked back to his spot on the overturned log and began an earnest search for any stray marks. If anything had happened to this book, it was his only copy and the publisher would hunt him down if he couldn't deliver the story. It was already 5 months overdue and he didn't have many more excuses to delay the deadline. Oi, what's the big deal, anyway? Naruto asked in annoyance. Once you've seen one naked girl, you've seen 'em all, right? You, Freya said, pity and annoyance warring inside him. You just don't get it. Whatever, Naruto said in with a shrug. Here, Freya said, rummaging through his pack before tossing his last book at the blonde, who caught it deftly. You read that and tell me it doesn't inspire you. Naruto blinked, then snorted, tossing it over his shoulder. You want inspiration? Jumping to his feet, Naruto formed an unfamiliar handseal. Sexy no jutsu. Freya blinked, surprised at the smoke, and then was nearly given a heart attack by what he saw. Staring at him with the sexiest pout he had ever seen was a buxom young woman, her blonde hair in pigtails while the smoke wafted strategically across her body. Genuine. Freya shouted, leaping to his own feet and giving 2 thumbs up. The naked women giggled, then winked at him. Sexy no jutsu, Anko version. If Freya had been on the verge of a heart attack before, he was now on the edge of brain death, all of his blood rushing south very quickly at the sight of a completely nude Anko. Stammering, he reached out across the fire to touch the woman, when suddenly, with a small puff, she was gone and Naruto was once more standing before him. Freya felt his hope and dreams come crashing down around him, and it was all he could do to keep from killing Naruto. Hey, Naruto said, lacing his fingers behind his head, eyes shut in that fox-like grin. So, what did you think of my jutsu? I can use it to become anything. Since Anko said I probably would never get the hang of the hens. She helped with the variation bit, but the original sexy no jutsu is all my idea. Freya just stared, unable to form words or logic. There was no other word for what Naruto had done. The blonde runt had broken the legendary ninja. Hey, are you listening to me? Naruto shouted indignantly, forming the seal once again. Harem no jutsu. Freya was promptly launched into the air by the blood that escaped his nose upon seeing so many beautiful naked women. He lay there twitching for several hours. Day 285. Oi, Naruto said, looking up from his latest sealing lesson. What is it now? Freya sighed, a vein throbbing in his forehead, as he paused once more in his writing. The only way he kept from smearing the blonde runt all over the forest was by remembering that they were almost done. Well, it's about that Gogyo thingy. Can you block it? Freya bit his tongue, then set his material aside, turning to face the blonde. Oh, blocking it's simple, you just have to not be hit. Simple as that, just like dodging any jutsu. Oh, Naruto muttered, turning back to his dirt seal. Don't get it wrong though, Freya continued, crossing his arms. In sealing, anything that can be done can be undone. Just, usually, you don't have enough time to undo it. Ho. Kami. Why me? Freya muttered in annoyance. Look. With sealing you can do anything, right? If you can seal fire, then you can release fire. Not that you want to undo every sealing you come across, hence why I haven't taught you the Gogyo Fuin or unsealed you myself. Wah. Naruto blinked, scratching his head. Wait. I'm sealed. Why do you think your chakra's been so screwed up lately? Freya answered, smirking. I mean, think about it. You said that first day that it didn't used to take that much effort to make cave bunshine. Oi, but it's not that hard now, Naruto said, blinking. Well, that's cause you've gotten better at controlling your chakra, Freya explained blandly. Right now your chakra is at a lower ebb than normal, so you have to control it better to achieve the same results as normal. When you're unsealed, you'll be hell of a lot more dangerous. Really? Naruto said excitedly. Yeah, think about minus. Freya thought for a moment, then shook his head, unable to come up with a good explanation for the boy. Sighing, he rolled his eyes and picked up his writing materials again. Just trust me on this, runt. Now, get back to work. Perverted bastard, Naruto muttered, almost sounding fond even as he turned back to work. Day 29 of training. Naruto was having an unusual dream. It involved ramen, but that wasn't the unusual part. That dubious honor belonged to the girl feeding him the ramen. Even that wasn't unusual, he always dreamt about Sakura feeding him ramen. No, the reason the dubious honor belonged to this girl was because he couldn't figure out who in the hell she was. Her eye color kept changing on him, and her hair too. Even her features would shift every so often. Then, finally his mind started latching onto a name for this girl. Wham! Naruto jerked awake, clutching his stomach and gasping for air. Pain coursed through his body, and his vision blurred, but he was used to pain and focused through it. Standing over him, arms crossed and looking as pissed off as any Oni, was his current teacher Freya. Good. You're awake, the man said blandly, as if he was talking about the weather. We can finally get this torture over with. Finally able to breathe, Naruto moved, slowly rolling away from the man and rising into a half crouch. Oi! What was that for? I was waking you up. Freya answered without an expression. Today's the last day of your training and minus. Wah. Naruto managed, his mind still slightly hampered by sleep. Then he felt his eyes go wide in realization. It's been a month. He started counting on his fingers before a bolt ran through him. It has. Yeah, Freya agreed in annoyance. Now as I saying, with what I has planned for today, you're going to need as much time as possible. Shutting his surprise down along with his despair at realizing he had gone a month without ramen, the blonde shifted into serious mode. Iro Sennin was talking as if he had something new for them to do, and Naruto was not about to screw up anything. Even though the lessons had been boring, often interrupted with perversion minus, the blonde knew just how strong he had gotten training with the man. This is actually going to be pretty simple. We're going to spar, the man smirked and crossed his arms. Sort of, anyway. We are. Naruto asked, jumping to his feet, a rush coursing through him at the thought of finally fighting. Whoa. Get ready to get your ass kicked. I said sort of, Freya interrupted with a snort. You're going to be restricted to what I taught you during this last month, but no cave bunshine, anything Anko taught you or anything else more advanced than the academy basics. Oi. Wait a minute. Naruto said angrily, realizing just how large a handicap that was putting on him. Why do I have 2 minus? Because I want to gauge how well you've learned what I taught, Freya said. Plus, I won't be fighting back. Just dodging or blocking. I want to test you, not kill you. Hey. Hey is the horses, Freya said. Now your goal of this test is to hit me, I mean a solid hit too, by lunchtime. Test. Naruto asked, scowling, as he thought about the academy. What happens if I don't hit you? Then I kill you. Then I go into Konoha and kill Anko, that INO girl, the old man at the ramen stand, and everybody else you told me about. Freya said, a deadly intent rolling off him. I'll kill everyone you hold dear and anyone that tries to stop me. Naruto opened his mouth to protest, to point out that he couldn't do that. But he felt the intent as the man had spoken, and he knew, instinctively, that this man was serious. That he really would go into Konoha and kill everybody, all because Naruto failed to hit him. If you has any delusions about this being a bluff, let me say this, I has no real ties left in this village. I don't care about anyone in that village. And I'm a Sannin, I could kill the Hokage if I felt like it. Which means I has no problem with a Chunin, Genin and Jonin. Naruto gulped, a chill racing up his back. Suddenly, He felt all this weight settling onto him, making him want to bow from the pressure. Or run screaming. He had so many lives depending on this, it wasn't even funny, but he had no choice but to fight. So, let's start, shall we? No sooner had those words left the man's mouth than Naruto exploded into action with a hasty Kase no Yaiba which Freya dodged easily followed by a Sunshine 2 where the Sannin had dodged. Naruto thrusted blindly with a kunai when he arrived, but Freya grabbed his wrist and shoved it down, while jumping over him. Tumbling forward from the momentum, Naruto managed a shoulder roll and whipped around firing off a series of kunai and shuriken. The Toad Master dodged and jumped easily and Naruto scrambled back to his feet, only to find the man twirling one of the kunai around a finger casually. Not bad, not good, but not bad, Freya said before tossing the bladed weapon aside. Well, let's get back to it, shall we? Growling, Naruto attacked yet again using tricks, attacks and combos one after the other. He could only do so much with the rules that the stupid bastard had set down, but he couldn't just give up. He dug deep into his bag of tricks and thought about how best to apply them. Freya lazily dodged through the latest barrage of jutsu and weapons, almost yawning. You know, I wonder if Anko will scream. No, I think she'll cry, because I'll tell her you could have stopped me and didn't. You won't touch her. Naruto roared and hurtled, head first at the man, only to be leapt over. However, that was exactly what Naruto had wanted. The man landed between two glowing seals, which exploded into a circle of flame that quickly died out. You know, Freya commented standing unharmed on the edge of the circle, I'm impressed. You adapt, you innovate, improvise all within a few seconds. But you still haven't hit me. Naruto charged once more, performing several rapid sunshines trying to confuse the man, then came out of the last one directly into a heavy style attack. Freya calmly blocked the blow, then jumped away with a slight push, as if he had done nothing more than swat a fly. Naruto, however, collapsed to one knee, surprised at how weak he felt after performing so many rapid sunshines. You know, that wasn't bad, Freya said conversationally. I think if you ever get unsealed, you shouldn't have a problem doing that a couple of times a day. Of course, to get unsealed, you'll have to hit me. Maybe I'll kill Oka at his desk. That sounds reasonable. Right. Gathering his strength, Naruto launched into yet another attack, and then another. On and on he went. When one attack failed, he tried another. Freya, however, treated each one with equal contempt, often talking about how he would kill Anko or Oka, always in great detail. Naruto was getting desperate. His own body was telling him how close to lunch it was getting. His time was almost up, and he still hadn't hit the man. He had to do something. Think of something. Anything. There had to be a trick that he was overlooking. All Naruto knew was that he wanted nothing more than to beat Freya's face in, threatening his friends. Shaking it off, he desperately tried to look over the last few hours and find some pattern. Heavy was out. Naruto had learned over the last few hours that it was useless against an opponent who defended instead of attacked. His wind blade was pointless, the sunshine was draining him like crazy for some reason, sunshine wouldn't be any help, and the hand was so unstable that he couldn't rely on it. You know, I've been thinking about that INO girl. She'll probably scream, she sounds like a screamer. I'll have to sew her lips shut, then Freya said conversationally in between attacks. Oh, well. Just means she'll has to smile through her throat ho. This spurred Naruto, with a roar of fury, to greater heights of desperation. He had almost forgotten that her life was included in this fight. If he failed, then... No, he couldn't let them die. In mid-attack, he suddenly had a realization, followed by an idea. A very stupid idea. All of his attacks so far had been head-on. He had allowed the bastard to keep pissing him off so much that he hadn't thought of it. The answer was simple, a three-step attack. That was the only answer. Charging forward, Naruto pulled a kunai and twisted his body, preparing for yet another attempt at using the heavy style. Freya of course causally sidestepped the attack and reached out to grab the boy's weapon, only to has his hand go through the arm. Sunshine. Turning, the man sidestepped the other Naruto that was sailing through the air, only to has it turn into a log with an exploding note attached. Kawerimi. Leaping aside, Freya twisted to avoid a blast of slicing air. Kase no Yaiba. And then was promptly attacked by yet another Sunshine, who had an arm pulled back, and he reached out to dispel it, only to has it suddenly perform a sunshine and hit him in the face as he turned. Freya stumbled, then sensing the follow-up attack lashed out. Naruto felt the air rush out of his lungs as the hand slammed into his stomach. There was a moment in which he was weightless and then was sent flying through the air before he crashed to the ground and skidded. Coming to a stop against the roots of a tree, he struggled to breathe, but he was sure about one thing: he had hit that sick bastard. Then, he promptly passed out. Sighing, Freya poked at the lunch he had prepared, staring curiously at the still unconscious blonde. It had been 3 hours since the test, 3 hours since Freya had struck out and unsealed him. Yet, Naruto still wasn't awake. Snorting, Freya shook his head, marking it off too, having nearly exhausted himself. Not surprising, considering the training he had been put through, which in retrospect, might have been a bit too much for the boy. Finishing his meal, he set it aside and turned back to his book, pen twirling between his fingers. This was the first chance he had to actually get some serious work done on his book. He had forgotten just how demanding teaching could be. Shrugging it off, he turned his mind to the more important task of writing the delicate threesome. 3 hours later, he was giggling, absorbed in his carefully crafted world. He was just getting to the interesting part where Peri's lover Akane had just come back after a long trip, only to find her in the arms of her most hated rival Minus, when Naruto suddenly leapt to his feet with a shout. Gurking, Freya fumbled with his book, then glared at the boy who was glaring back at him. "About time you got up," Freya said after a moment, turning back to his precious novel. "I fixed you some lunch." "Oi, you freaking," threatened Minus. Naruto paused, then blinked in surprise. Lunch." "Yeah," Freya said dismissively. "Figured you'd be hungry after that test." "Yeah, well. You didn't." Naruto paused, sounding uncertain as he picked up his food. "You know. You're still alive, ain't ya?" Freya said without looking up, a feeling of annoyance flashing through him. "You hit me, I unsealed you. Your training's done, just go back to Konoha and make Anko proud." "Oi, but why'd you threaten them?" Naruto demanded around his food. Freya paused, frowning as he considered that question. On the one hand, he wanted to be done with the brat as quickly as possible, and on the other, the boy did deserve to know the reason behind the test. Snapping his book closed, the toad hermit turned to stare at the blonde. "To show you something that my sensor kept hammering into my head. Ho. Look, a shinobi is strongest when he's trying to protect something important to him," Freya explained slowly, scratching his nose lightly. Knowing Anko, she's probably never mentioned that protecting something important makes you stronger. "Not really." "Well, that's not surprising, but it's true. You should know it." "You do know it, actually," Freya said, snorting. "You just don't know it consciously, but the fight with Orochimaru in the Forest of Death shows that you know it." "What are you talking about?" "You're strong for a genin. I'll admit that. But that's because you drive yourself and work on everything twice as hard as most people. But Orochimaru has over 50 years of experience, is a sanin, and a genius. A genin, no matter how strong, is nothing to him." But I don't remember it all." "But I know hurt him," Naruto said angrily. "Yes. But that's only because you were trying to protect Anko. That's what made you strong enough to stand up to him," Freya said, climbing to his feet. "I threatened Anko, Luka, and that INO girl, because you talked about them more than everybody else. I had to make you realize consciously what you knew instinctively." "Oh," Naruto said, looking down slightly with a scowl. "Plus, like I told you at the beginning of the month, as you were then, you could never be Hokage. Every Hokage knows that they have to protect the village and those precious to them more than anything." Picking his various items up, he turned back to Naruto, who was scowling at the fire. "You talked about being Hokage, but all your reasons weren't good enough." "Everyone is precious to a Hokage," Naruto said in a low tone, snapping a stick to toss into the fire. "That old Billy Goat said that to me when I bugged him about why he bothered with me." "Yeah," Freya said, smirking. "See, you knew it, just had to be reminded. Now, go back to the village, get some sleep, and let me know how things go." "Oi, you're leaving?" "Yeah, I got to get my book to the publisher. Otherwise, I'll has wasted all my data gathering." Seeing the disappointment on the boy's face, he sighed. "Don't worry, I'll be back. I got a few small things to take care of here." "Oh," Naruto said, grinning slightly. Turning, Freya started off, whistling an upbeat tune, thinking about the freedom he now had. All that extra time to work on his precious novel. Hell, he could probably even manage to start the next novel. Then, He heard Naruto call his name, and he paused, turning back to wonder what that runt was going to say. Harem no jutsu, Anko Virayan. Naruto shouted, a prickish smile on his face. Freya was sent skyrocketing by the sight of so many nubile, nude female bodies, who were blowing kisses and suggestive looks at him. That boy was a genius. That's it to this part. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe to the next video, as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out my other playlist. Hope you would like them too.